Well, thanks, Valerie, and thank you all for being here today. It's a wonderful morning out there, isn't it? And so, of course, here we are inside. But at any rate, we're so glad to get rid of the heat and humidity, even just for a few days. I want to just, they say you're never supposed to start with an apology, but we had a small tragedy in the dealers division this morning, and so the person in charge, Rhonda Miller, whose name you see up here, is going to be leaving, and we're going to be turning it over later to Sherry Van Hook, who is also an examiner in the auto dealer division. She's been here a number of years, and she certainly knows the area very well. So thank you for bearing with us this morning. It was just something that was unexpected that we did not realize was going to happen. So again, I really appreciate you joining us. We certainly have a full agenda today. We've partnered with almost every state agency that touches your business, and they will all be making a presentation. So it's our hope that when you leave here today, you'll have a better understanding of how state government works and how we can help you do your business in Indiana. My team and I are always looking for ways to improve our service levels and relationships with all of our customers, and we recognize that each and every dealer in Indiana has a huge dollar investment in their businesses. So it's our goal to be service-oriented and to the almost 5,000 auto dealers that we regulate. I often hear that, when my office calls a dealership and says we're coming for a visit, it can be very uncomfortable. But I hope that you will rest assured that this is a misconception, and it really isn't about us checking to make sure that every T is crossed or every I is dotted. It's simply that we are there to help you comply with state government and the rules that we all have to abide by. So when we do an audit, it's really and truly our goal to cause as little disruption as possible. Obviously, we have to have access to files at times. We have to have somebody there to answer questions about the deal jackets and so forth. But for the most part, everybody else in the dealership can go about their daily business, and we don't have to bother everybody. And you can rest assured that you can go ahead and do what you need to do on a daily basis. If you do have questions about the process, we have information on our website, or you can call the division as well. I also hear that dealers believe that if there's one individual who files a complaint, that it triggers an audit. And rest assured that is not true. Now, if we have a number of complaints, that might have us go there to make sure that there's no systemic reason that we're getting those complaints. However, our goal usually is to just call you, get an electronic copy of the record, and many times, just solve that complaint along with you as best we can. We have to hear out our consumers. That's our job, and we will do that. But we also want to hear from you, the dealer, as to what happened. And you can help us get through that process very quickly. I would also say that, I'm a firm believer that we all learn from our mistakes. So one of the things that we've been doing since I've been secretary is if we see there is maybe a systemic problem, we go for education rather than fines. And I think that, Rhonda has done a great job of setting up those educational opportunities. I would say that, this morning, we actually had this scheduled in a different room, and so we absolutely filled up the class very quickly. And I know that you had other people in your dealerships that you wanted to bring, but rest assured we'll be doing some of these around the state yet this year. So there will be other opportunities for folks in your dealerships to attend. I want to say it's been a pleasure to be with you today. And again, I'm sorry you can't hear from Rhonda. She had to leave, but Sherry Van Hook is going to be your presenter on this PowerPoint, so just bear with her as she walks through this. As I said, she's very knowledgeable about the dealers services division. Before I stop, I do want to make sure that I thank Association of Dealers, the Auto Dealers Association of Indiana, for providing lunch today. I called Marty Murphy and I said, Marty, we really need for you to help us out no hesitation. So as you enjoy your lunch, please thank Marty for providing that lunch. Again, I will turn this now over to Sherry Van Hook, and I appreciate all of you being here. Have a great day.
Well, thank you, Secretary Lawson, for that introduction. And I'm sure all of you have at one time met one of our examiners. If not myself, then we have Becky Kimberly, who is from the South Bend area. We have Aleda, who is from the Indianapolis area. And somewhere around here is Christy Gaines. Oh, she's in the very back. She is up in the Elkhart area. And we have several other examiners throughout the state. So our goal, and as Secretary Lawson had mentioned, is that we're here to assist you with your business and help you to understand the Indiana rules and regulations. And if there are difficulties in your business, we are the people you need to be reaching out to for that educational purpose. There is many opportunities throughout the state to reach out to us by phone, by email, or attending one of the classes that Rhonda has scheduled throughout the state. So I hope that you, and I'm sure my fellow coworkers, will take advantage of those types of opportunities to not only improve your business, but to also make Indiana a very dealer-friendly business. Okay? Now, for some of the things that you need to know today, there are restrooms outside. There are some to the right here and some to the left. Oh, thank you, Aleda. Aleda just said the ones to the right are closed. So if you go out the doors here, make a sharp right, go through the double glass doors, and on the left side, there are restrooms available for all of you to use. Lunch, of course, will be served in the conference room behind us, A. There will be tables set up and labels of what is in the lunch boxes, so there's some varieties for you to choose from. Of course, as Secretary mentioned, it is served, by the Auto Dealer Service Division. Association has provided us a great lunch today, so please partake and thank them. The conference also will have breakout sessions, so from 9 to 9:30 we welcome Secretary Lawson. From 9:30 to 10:30, that's what I'll be taking over for Rhonda. She has a very lengthy presentation, so I probably won't hit on all of the screens, but you're more than welcome to meet and greet any one of us that's here today and ask additional questions. We will also be in the breakout area, some of us to answer your questions. We have many speakers today, so it's going to be kind of a quick motion thing, okay? So with that being said, bear with me. I'm going to try to use a clicker. And I guess they tell me it's like my remote on my TV. So again, I'm going to jump through the screens real quick. If there's something that you feel I should maybe focus on a little more, don't hesitate to ask, okay? So let's go through here. Okay, the overview, I can't see. The overview is the common violations that we see within the dealers, what to expect during an audit if you've never had one, the notary public information, enforcement action, and please don't be afraid of enforcement action. That's a hard word, but it's really something that benefits people. User rules in the dealer's portal. If you've never used our online sessions, your desktop. Some owners never see their desktop, so they leave it to people within their organization, and so maybe you need to go back and familiarize yourself if you've never done it. Current online functions, notes about renewals, Dealer Digest subscription, great little piece of information that's on our website, how to contact us, and the contacts within the state of Indiana. Okay. Some of the common violations that we see the most is the failure to deliver title to the consumers within that 31-day period. Improper use of the interim plates and the dealer plates. Dealers, your plates are for your use only and not to be bought, sold, leased, or copied. Failure to maintain or produce records. Dealers are required to maintain in their records at their established place of business, whether it's a hard copy or electronically, something that we can have when we appear for an audit that you can produce for us. Failure to disclose rebuilt status. That is something that's really important. Dealers are required to notify the consumer before the contract is signed. You are buying a rebuilt vehicle, and there is a form on our website that you can use, or if you want to just put it in writing in another method, but you must notify the consumer. unpermitted off-site sales. It's summertime, and that's what we see the most of, is that dealers fail to request a permit to conduct an off-site sale. So they set up in the local Walmart parking lot, they set up at the local gas station that's in their area. So if you happen to see an off-site sale and you're not sure if that individual is A, licensed in the state of Indiana or even has a permit to be there, you can notify us and we will look into it for you. But it's one of those things, it's summertime and it pops up everywhere. We see less and less in the winter months. Failure to timely deliver title. Dealers, you have 31 days from the date of purchase to provide that title to the consumer. And if you are not able to, there's a form, it's a dealer affidavit, that you can fill out and give to the consumer that you must fill out completely and says when you will provide that title to the consumer. Also pay attention to the wording that's on that dealer affidavit because it's very specific that you are to provide that title, that you are to provide it to a commercial method, FedEx, UPS, or certified mail. So by doing so, with those three methods, it's a way for you to track that you have delivered that title to the consumer within the 31-day window. And if the consumer files a complaint and one of the examiners come in and they say, ask you that question, you're able to pull out those documents to say, I put it in the mail on this date. Here's my return receipt for certified. Here's my FedEx receipt. Here's my UPS receipt showing that they signed for it. It's very vital to you and your business. Failure to deliver title can also result in some violation of fines. The first time is $100, second time is $250, third time is $500, and it's $500 thereafter. So I can only express to you folks that delivering that title is very, very important. Improper use of interim plates. That's one of the other things that we encounter a lot with dealers is that I understand a sympathetic heart. We all have a sympathetic heart, but it's one paper plate per unit sold. So if you generate a paper plate for a unit that is sold and the consumer comes back to you and they say, I don't have the money to register my vehicle. Can I have another paper plate? That is not an option for you. They have already received a paper plate, so you cannot generate another paper plate. Now, if they come back to you and they say, I lost my plate, and it still is within that 45-day window, you can go back in the system and regenerate another plate. It doesn't give them any more days. It doesn't change the numbers that's on there, but you can generate another plate just because, as a courtesy, maybe we had a really major snowstorm in Lake County, or we've had heavy rains down in Jeffersonville, or they've gone through the car wash, whatever this issue that caused them to lose that plate, you do have that ability to go back in and generate another plate for them. Just remember, if it's past the 45 days, there is no generating another plate. Okay. Improper use of dealer plates. The dealer plates are for you to use in your inventory and for your business people, maybe your employees. You have an employee of the month, or you have a finance manager, salesperson, however you choose to use it. Designated plates are there also. So the dealer plates are for your use and your use only. So if you're not able to provide a title to a consumer within 31 days, and their paper plate has expired, and you know you can't give another paper plate, you cannot give them a dealer plate to run on the vehicle that they currently have purchased. Once that purchase is made, that vehicle is no longer in your inventory. So you have to maintain your dealer plates. And a recommendation that I have, and I'm sure the other examiners might give you that idea, is that if you have several dealer plates, maybe you have 15, 20, or 100, keep a log of the dealer plates that you have, who you have signed them out to. That way, if you happen to lose one, you don't have to do a major inventory of your plates. If the finance manager comes to you and says, hey, I lost the dealer plate, and you say, well, which one did you have? And they're, I don't remember, he says, or she says. Pull out that log. You can see Billy Bob had that dealer plate. Then you can require to replace that plate with an inspection form from law enforcement. Also, another suggestion I would have any dealer plate that you have, I would keep a copy of the registrations also on file, so that when you report to law enforcement that you have lost a dealer plate, you can pull out that registration. That's not only proof of ownership for you for that dealer plate, but it also shows what plate that you have lost. So those are some suggestions that I like to give to the dealers in my area. I'm sure the other examiners probably have given the similar suggestions. It's called accountability and control. So very, very important. Dealer plates come up missing frequently. You go to the auction, the plates stay on the vehicle, and you go into the auction and you come back and that plate is missing. That happens frequently. And so keeping your eye on that dealer plate is very, very important. The bottom phrase that says dealer plates may not be loaned, leased, transferred, copied, altered, or reproduced. That's very important because a lot of times the dealer will lease out the plates, or they will make Xerox copies, or they will alter the plate because they haven't paid their renewals with us. And so they will alter the plate to make it reflect that they are current with that. So it's very, very important that you do not do any of those violations. It can be very problematic for your license. Here we go. Failure to disclose rebuilt titles. This is something that's not new to the state of Indiana. It is something that has been in our code for many, many years. It is something that has been brought to our attention over the years as we see more and more rebuilt vehicles on Indiana roads and highways, and more consumers are buying these rebuilt vehicles. So dealers, make sure you understand you are to disclose that information to the consumer prior to accepting money or even signing that contract. Because we have many, many complaints that consumers will say, I didn't know I had a rebuilt vehicle. And I went to trade it in. And the dealer I went to trade it into says, hey, this is a rebuilt title. It diminishes the appraisal value of that vehicle. Then they're filing complaints. And then that's a reason for us to come and look at your records of, are you disclosing that prior to the sale of the vehicle? A lot of times dealers do not even show the title work or the paperwork to the consumer because you title on behalf of the consumer, maybe the finance company that you are working with. That's a requirement that you are to have. Maybe that's something, if you're a buy here, pay here dealer, that is something that you do. You want to secure your property going down the road, so you go ahead and you title on behalf of the consumer at the BMV, which that is perfectly fine. But not notifying them that they are purchasing a rebuilt vehicle is a problem that needs to be addressed. I suggested there's a form on our website that you are more than welcome to use. If you want to create a form for yourself to make sure that they sign and date and they clearly understand they're buying a rebuilt vehicle. And I want to include into that also a flood damage vehicle, because flood damage is also included in the Indiana code. We have had a lot of rain in many places, not only in Indiana, but other states. So sometimes those vehicles go to the auctions, and then they end up here in Indiana, and they end up in your lot, and the consumer purchases it. So always beware. This is something that is really, really important that you need to consider. And advise your staff. This is very, very, very important. Unpermitted off-site sales, I mentioned that earlier. It's very easy. We have on our website, you can fill out a form. You have it signed off by your local zoning or whoever is in charge of the area and your neighborhood. Send in your money, and then you get a permit to sale off-site. Now, remember, Indiana does not allow Sunday sales, so you have a Monday through Saturday. You have to actually have a location that meets the requirements. Nobody can be at your off-site sale but you. So if you put in a request for an off-site sale and the neighboring dealer next to you says, can I put my cars over there? I'm sorry, he cannot. He can apply for his own permit. Something for you and you only. Failure to maintain records and produce records. This is one of the violations we see the most of because dealers do not clearly understand, and this is why it's a good educational purpose. What do I need to keep in my records? How long do I need to keep those records? Can I keep them on my laptop in the cloud? Yes, you can. You can keep them electronically. You can keep them hard copies. The main purpose is when we do an audit, you're able to produce those complete records to us. On our website, we have a list of what do I need in my deal jackets? What is required of me? So you need to go on the website and you can look and see. The one thing that we see the most that dealers miss is that, number one, they don't have complete information for the consumer. We're missing the consumer's name, address, contact information. They don't have signatures, not only for the salesperson, but also for the consumer, and dates. Those are vital pieces of information. The other thing that they miss, and is really, really important, they don't keep a copy of the title, front and back, to show that they reassigned that title from their dealership to the consumer. And that's another piece of information that's vital, because it helps you out if we get a complaint for a non-delivery. That's a piece of information that is vital to us to show they did reassign it to the consumer, and here's the consumer's signature that they did receive that title. Very piece of vital, that information goes a long, long way. Also, the thing that we see is the Federal Buyer's Guide. A lot of times we come onto your lots and we don't see the buyer's guides in the windows as they should be. So you really want to keep that updated. And if they fade, replace them. You really want to keep that also in case a consumer files a complaint, says, I have mechanical issues. How many times have you had a consumer come back and say, I have mechanical issues and I want you to fix it? Right? Right? And what do you say? Do you say, well, you bought it as is? But if you don't have that buyer's guide in there and signed by not only the dealership but the consumer, you really have not completed your work as far as notifying the consumer you bought it as is.
I have a question.
Sure.
How long does the Secretary of State recommend that we keep those?
You're required to keep your records for 7 years. Now, at your place of business, you only have to keep the 2 current years. So we can go back on you for that 5 to 7 years if we feel there's many violations. But we don't want you to keep 10 or 15 years of records at your place of business. That's a lot of paperwork, isn't it? So the 2 current years is what we suggest that you keep at your place of business.
But you said we can't upload them to electronic files
Yeah.
after 2 years, so big deal?
Yes, you can. And then if an examiner comes in and asks to see certain records, then you can generate that. You can print that right off and show it right to the examiner. Because I know a lot of the dealers, especially the new car dealers who have hundreds of sales a month, there's no way you can keep that type of storage. So I'm sure you have somebody who scans something within that 30-day window of selling that vehicle, and then you can pull that off if an examiner wants it. One of the greatest things that we have gone to recently is that how many have you gotten a letter or an email from an examiner that said, I'd like to see Billy Bob's sales records, and then you just send them to us electronically. The efficiency there is so beneficial, not only to you, but to us, because we don't interrupt your established place of business. And so that's something that we have started probably in the last year, so it's been very beneficial for all. And I would suggest if the examiner sends you that email or sends you that letter, please get on, answer it as quickly as possible. Because delay delays us. What to expect during an audit? It's very simple. All we would request is that we have a desk. We do not want to be in your main room. No way do we want the public to be alerted that we're there, because it causes conflict not only for you, but then the public is like, well, I don't know if I really trust that dealer. They're there doing an audit. That doesn't look good for us and for you. So if you have a room or a place that you can put us in a corner, as long as we have a desk, a chair, electricity, we can set up our equipment. Our job is not to disrupt your business. Our job is there to look what we need to look at. At the end of the day, when we're done, then we can sit down with you and discuss what are the concerns that we have. It's not anything to be upset about. It's not anything to lose sleep over. It's just that we will come in every now and then and do an audit of your records. Remember, we are here to help you. We are here to make sure that you're complying with the Indiana rules and regulations. And that's our job. That's our job. And if you're not, then what can we do to help you? I'll go through that. Notary Republic. Sorry. The enforcement action, of course, if we see any violations, then we'll compile a case report that is sent on to our legal department. You might get a letter from the legal department, or an email, or a phone call, and at that point, that's who you need to be having the communication with, because that's the people that have reached out to you, and that's who you need to be referring all questions to. And again, I can't stress enough, if they reach out to you, respond. It's something that, probably a minor situation, or what can we help you with? User roles, there's the one I was just discussing. Sometimes the owner has not set themselves up as the primary user. They have established their finance manager, their general manager, their title clerk, and that's okay. It's whatever they want to do. But these are the individuals who also can have access to the system, okay? So that primary user, they want to make sure who they're allowing to have access to not only their interim plates, but their dealer plates, and any information that might be coming across their desktop as far as, hey, your insurance is about ready to expire, or your bond is about ready to expire, or we're having a training session on this date, that information is conveyed amongst anyone who has access to the dealer's desktop. Aleda.
It's important to know that you can create an account for every employee. So the reason that we changed the system is so that you guys have access as the primary user to remove any users when they quit their job or they go to another dealer. You have the access there as a primary user to remove them. So don't use the same login for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Don't share your password and stuff like that. And that's why we created the user roles
Yeah.
for you.
And that's a
If you
very
have
good
question,
point.
You can always call and we'll be able to help you set it up.
Very good point that Aleda made. Many times when we look at your paper plate log online, we see the same email. So everybody in the dealership is using the same email. We recommend that each person who has access creates their own email account. Because here's what happens. Sometimes you get an employee that might be disgruntled with you. And before they leave, they might generate many paper plates to many friends who have not bought a vehicle from you. And then we do an audit and we ask for these sales records and this sales records and for this person, and you can't produce it. Well, why? Because the disgruntled employee generated paper plates, and you will say, well, who was that person? Well, I don't know, because they all used the same login and the same email address. So if we have different logins and different email address for each person who has access to that, we're more likely can go back and pinpoint who that individual was. And it helps you out immensely. Go ahead.
On a previous screen, you mentioned interim plate log, but since it's all online, do we still have to keep a manual plate log in the office?
Very good question. No, you do not. Everything is online, and it is. And I'm glad you brought that up because that does bring something to mind to me. The online plate log that you have, each field must be populated. Even if it doesn't have a red asterisk next to it, you still need to populate that field. A lot of the dealers will say, well, there's no asterisk by the first name, so I just populate the field for the last name. Each field must be populated. That way we can distinguish between Bill Smith and Smith and Smith and Smith. Well, what Smith is it? Is it still Bill Smith? Is it Mary Lou? Is it, Charlene? So each field must be populated.
Email? They have an email field on there too.
That's a decision you can make as a business model, because that's not really one of the requirements for the plate log, but that's a very good question. As I always say, the more you can gather about a consumer, the better off you are.
Watercraft will still maintain a log.
Yes, currently Watercraft still maintains the plate log. They haven't got on board with us yet as far as issuing the plates, the paper plates online.
If I go to the plate log and I have other users, can I see that they did a plate log? Because sometimes my sales team splits, they both are working the same customer, I don't want the same plate printed twice.
Yes, you do. Yes, you can. Everybody can see the plate log. Yeah, that's a good question, because I had that at another one, and it's like everybody can see that plate log. in the back.
If you have you're selling to a company name, do you still have to populate the first name field or just the one that's asterisk for last name? Like-
Whatever the field will accept. Some companies have a very long name, so I would try to put in as much as I can the first line, and then if you have to roll down to the second line, then use the second line.
The second line is the required one. That's the one that's asterisk.
Right, but you want to use both lines. So because if it says Amico sales and records, Shelbyville, Indiana, you want to make sure that Amico will fit in, and that way we have a complete name.
But if the complete name that's in the second field is asterisk, I still want the part of it in the first one?
If you can, you should.
Okay.
You should. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? That's probably one of our biggest educational tools that we have to explain to dealers is that paper plate log. Online, you must populate all the fields. And it helps us and it helps you. Okay?
I have a question about something you touched on just a little bit ago.
Okay.
Keeping the records in the office for 2 years, and for 5 and 7, are those all hard copy or can you do electronic?
Either way, whatever you can produce. Remember, it has changed that you can keep things electronically or you can keep things hard copy. So however you can produce it.
I might mention that on your website materials and stuff that are there at the SOS, there's a lot of helpful stuff there, but it does leave the impression that you still need a written plate law. And I had that same question she had, we're putting all that into the computer now, why can't that be our plate law? So it's just not real clear on
Okay.
the materials that, hey, this replaces the written.
Well, again, we license Watercraft, and they do not have online plate logs. So they will still have the same requirements as keeping the paper plate log, so that we don't condense down and single out anybody. It's just there. So just always know what's online is what you need to have. Okay? That's a good point to point out to us.
Both, right? Both, yes, we have to have it written.
Yes, because you don't generate a plate online for Watercraft, do you? You have a little...
I've never told one, I don't know.
Okay, well, good. Good. So, we have to hit all the bases, and sometimes it does seem kind of confusing. I understand completely. User's role in the dealer portal. Again, when you opened up a business, or even when we went to the system, you probably got a letter, and it had a little PIN number, and it told you how to establish you're the administrator, and then it also tells you how to set up for other individuals who you want to give access to.
And we have that on the website too.
Yes, we do. We have it on the
There's
website.
videos, there's guides, you can call,
Yeah.
we can help you.
So I cannot stress enough that if you are the primary user, take that moment out of the day to go on the website and see what are some of the updates. What are the notifications? Maybe I got a notification that my bond was going to expire, and we do notify you, I believe it's 75 days prior to the bond expiring and the insurance expiring. It's getting ready to be expired, so you probably want to get everything in line so you can get that to us, because if the bond expires and the insurance expires, you're suspended and you can't print paper plates. Later.
Now, it will only notify you if you sign up for,
So they actually,
Okay, so it
they actually do the suite. But I think it's maybe, can you touch on how they become a primary user with the PIN? This is probably the number one thing that we get calls about, is people not
So-
logging in with a PIN.
all right.
Aleda
so
could
you
answer
first
that better.
receive the letter with your PIN when you first open your business. Then you will go into our system and you will create a user and a password. It's just like creating a Gmail account. And then after you create that, you go into our system and you will go to Find My Dealer License. Once you click on Find My Dealer License, you will put your dealer number and the PIN that they gave you. The PIN, using that PIN will make you the primary user. The PIN can only be used once, so if you put it in and somebody else go in and put it in again, it will not work. So the PIN will only work once, and that will make you the primary user. Once you're the primary user, you can go in and add and give people, assign them a role, like you will want this person to just do plates. So he will create an account just like you did. Just like you gotta go in, set up your account, create your password. The only difference is that person does not need to enter the PIN. They just have to go to Find My Dealer License, put their dealer number, and then they will be linked to your dealer. Your job as the primary user is to go in and go to Manage Users, enter the person, you gotta know their email address, and you click on their profile and you will give them permissions to do certain roles. So that's the difference.
And one thing about this, and that has come to mind to me, what Aleda has said, I cannot stress enough of creating their own login and email. Because if they don't, here's another little scary thing that happens. When they leave your place of business, guess what? They can sit at home and generate paper plates and sell them on the street corner. So that's why I stress everybody have their own login and their own email address. That way, as the administrator, as Aleda said, you can go in and delete that person out of the system and they do not have access to your interim plates. Unfortunately, we have to protect ourselves. Aleda talked about that. Oh, I love this. Current online functions. Our division has come into the 21st century with the computers. Everything is a computer anymore. Everything is online with us anymore. We order from Amazon. We order from Walmart our groceries nowadays. This system is developed to assist you and assist us. So using it to the best of your ability and the capacity that it has will expedite your business immensely. If I need additional paper plates, I don't have to print off a form anymore and mail it into the office. I can just do that online, and it goes right into the office. If I want additional dealer plates, the same scenario. If I want to amend my license, I can do it online. Maybe I want to open up a second business someplace. I don't have to fill out a form. I can do it online. And then that goes into the dealer division, and you can attach all the necessary documents you need in order to complete that application. So going online and looking at everything that we have available to you, I would say is a very good educational experience. We have information how to contact us. Aleda's name is on there. Becky's name is on there. My name is on there. Erin, who is one of our attorneys, her name is on there. Our supervisors' names are on there. You can email, you can call. I would really stress emailing for this reason, and I hear this almost daily, is that I keep calling and calling and calling and nobody answers the phone. Well, there are many, many calls coming in daily, and if you can't get through, send an email. That is the best way to reach out to us. Probably the most effective and efficient way to reach out to us, because an email will catch somebody's attention a lot quicker than sitting on a phone. Because if you sit and wait on that phone call, how angry are you by the time somebody answers it? Really, you're angry, aren't you? It's just like if I have to call DirecTV about a problem with my satellite service, by the time I get to an operator, I am just like burning. And I'm sure you are too. So if I send an email and they respond to me within a 24, 48-hour time limit, then I'm pretty happy about a lot of things. Somebody recognized me, right? So how many of you like called the office and called the office and called the office? Yeah. Send an email. And the email is legal@sos.in.gov. And somebody will respond to you. Or your information will be forwarded on to the examiner in your area. And then that individual will reach out to you. Well, I use legal. We get several. On our website, look, you'll see several email addresses. There's that dealer's one, okay? Notes about renewals. Do I have my bond? Do I have my insurance? Check the status on the dashboard. Is my renewal coming up? Some people don't even look to see when their license are due for renewal. So it's important. Check it, check it, check it. Okay? You can pay online. You don't have to send a check to us. You have a major credit card? Go online and pay with a major credit card. How simple have we made it, right? More effective, more efficient. Oh, this is really, really a good Dealer Digest is online. It is done quarterly. There are past Dealer Digests, so if you want to go back and look at what we have changed over the few years, very informative. Gives you ideas on any legislative changes. It gives you updates on what is the up-and-coming events. Gives you ideas on record-keeping requirements. Very, very informative dealer alerts. How to contact us. There's our main line. Or you can email us, as Aleda said, dealers@sos.in.gov. We have a wonderful website, so go to the website and look us up. Here's our contact information is on our website. You can see the different areas. Christy Gaines is in the north central part of the state. Rebecca Kimberling is in the northeast part of the state. Myself, I'm in the west, and I'm up in the region area. That's where my area is. We have Trey and Aleda, who are here in the Marion County. One's on the east side and one's on the west side. Carol Poe, who's in the southeast part of the state. Casey Meeks, who's in the southwest. And our outreach coordinator, Rhonda Miller. And if Rhonda has a question at any time and she's not able to give you the directions, she will forward it on to the examiner, who will be able to help you in that area. Sometimes we have just areas that don't experience the same thing as what they would experience in Lake County. So we have cross-the-border questions all the time. Customer comes from Illinois. Customer comes from Michigan. Customer comes from Kentucky. What's the sales tax I need to collect? Lots and lots of questions. So,
Can you find a spreadsheet of that, of the sales tax that varies per state?
I believe you can get that from Revenue. I believe they are here today.
Is the dealer page?
It's also on our dealer website.
On their
It's on their dealer page, so if you go to the revenues, and that's probably a question you can ask today, and they'll give you directions on how to find it. Okay? Thank you for being patient with us.
All right, well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started with the next presentation. My name is Lindsay Miller. I'm one of the general counsels and the current acting deputy director of consumer credit for the Indiana Department of Financial Institutions. And thank you so much for coming today, and I want to thank the Secretary of State's office for inviting us to participate. We always appreciate getting an opportunity to speak with all of you and explain what our role is in your business and vice versa. So before I start on the presentation, I'd like to invite our director, Tom Fite, to come forward and say a few words to all of you.
Thank you. Good morning. Everybody's awake? Awesome. I'll try to fix that. Literally a few words because Lindsay has the bulk majority of our presentation for today, but mostly came today to introduce myself to you, but also to make an offer. My background, I've been doing this for 20 years, different roles within the DFI for 20 years. Leadership roles for 10 of those, and director now for 3 years. So I've been here pretty much since I was a child, literally a child. A couple things I figured out along the way are 99% plus of all the findings we have in a regulatory environment are accidents. Misunderstandings, somebody misinterpreted the law, a form didn't get filled out correctly, someone misunderstood what the form was, heaven forbid, a bad vendor, that happens, right? 99+% of the time that's the case. 1% or less of the time, I can tell you a lot of stories, right? We keep a lot of bad actors out of Indiana for all of Indiana's industry's benefits. Those 99% of the time, though, are the ones I really want to focus on, right? The 1% we'll take care of, that's our job. We'll keep the riffraff out of Indiana. But how do we help good businesses like yours work through the issues that you have from a regulatory environment? So in 20 years, I've worked with all the other state regulators, everything from the smallest in places like Rhode Island, and see how they do things, to the largest like the DFS in New York, and seeing how they do things, and it's very different. Also had the opportunity to work with all the federal regulators, FDIC, OCC, SEC, CFPB, all the alphabet soup. So through that time, you kind of gather experiences and you figure out kind of the way you think regulation should be done. And to me, I kind of sum it up in one word, and it's proactive. I think proactive regulation is the real key to success. And I think that's why we've had a pretty good environment in Indiana for 40 or 50 years, at least the back of the experiences of the people that work with me. And I think that kind of sums up my offer to you guys today is I think If you look at what we've done at the DFI, particularly the last 3 or 4 years, we put out a lot of guidances on our website trying to help industries work through issues that they have. We've greatly increased our presence with associations. We have every association in our office at least once a year, some multiple times a year. We've had multiple businesses in our office. We've had a lot of outreach. We're here today, I think, a good example. And what we're really trying to do is take these handful of issues that come up at the 99% of the positive, good, hardworking businesses and find ways to make those issues go away before they occur. So things like gap insurance, gap refunds, a big one with the car industry, right? Those things come up for us pretty often. How can we find a way to better communicate, educate, guide those kinds of issues at your businesses before they occur so that at the end of the day, we don't get into a situation where you're having to do refunds, not favorable. The consumer is out their money for a little while, not favorable, and we're spending our time as regulators to have to work through those issues, not favorable. So to me, anytime you have a triple loss like that, it's a good place to plug in and think about maybe a different way to do it. So to the extent possible, we're a small agency and you're regulated by a small part of our small agency, by the way. But to the extent possible, I'd like to increase our presence even beyond the day, find ways to better plug in with you, have you into our office, come to your offices, et cetera, for the next couple of years to see if there's a way not to help with the issues that you have with regulation in your segment, but maybe actually eliminate them if we can. So the things I would think about, if you have a new product, call us. New forms, new contracts, call us. Some maybe issues that are coming up inside your business, we see a lot of businesses, right? We can probably help work through most of those types of issues. Change in leadership, change in personnel, change in staff, all those things that come along that cause you a little bit of a business anxiety, call us first. We'll be happy to come out, kind of walk you through the pitfalls we're seeing, go through some of the current topics that are coming up, maybe give you a couple things to think about so that we can educate you on the front end about the things we're seeing and the places we're having some issues to keep your business from having those same issues reoccur. It'll save everybody a lot of time. So I'm not going to talk much longer. I just want to make that offer to you, make sure I personally made that offer because it's sincere, and I'll have business cards here and be here at the table for a little while even if you want to stop by and talk to me, but would love to get to know people in your industry a little bit better, and also would love to kind of see on a weekly basis people from your industry stopping by, talking to us about new things going on, trying to get some help and guidance to kind of transparently and cooperatively work through any kind of regulatory issue in your industry. So that's all I have. She has 45 slides, by the way, so I'm not going to take a whole lot more time, but we'll stick around and be happy to meet anybody in the hallway here after the presentation. So thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So I promise to try and make this as painless as possible. For those of you who are, can I just ask, just so I can understand the room a little better, can I ask who in the room is in F&I? Okay. And who does buy here, pay here? Okay, great, good. So most of this presentation today is for your two groups. What about leasing? All right, well, great. Well, that covers a lot of the groups for materials that we're going to talk about today. So here's just an overview of what I'd like to cover. So what is the DFI? A lot of people are really unsure what our agency is and who we regulate. So I'd like to just give you a little bit of a snapshot of our agency and tell you a little bit about who we regulate, including what portion of your business we regulate. We'll talk a little bit about once you are registered with the department, what those filing requirements are for registration, which includes the notice of intent to basically tell us you're extending credit or doing consumer lease activity. And then we have an annual filing that occurs every year after that. And then I'd like to do a little bit of an overview of what a DFI examination will consist of and give a little bit of education and background on various aspects of some of the credit transactions that are regulated by our office and that you are likely routinely doing at your business. And so that'll be retail installment contracts, consumer leases, and then as Tom mentioned earlier too, ancillary products is something that we focus on quite a bit in an examination. And so I want to cover those in a little bit more detail, and then provide you some resources that you can refer to for guidance regarding credit transactions that we are going to address in our presentation. So what is the DFI? So the DFI is a non-cabinet executive branch regulatory agency. That basically just means we're organized under the governor. We have a members board that serves as our agency's ultimate authority. So our agency's board is actually made up of industry members. So we have 6 bipartisan members who represent our regulated industries, and then including our director. So we have 2 major divisions in our office, the depository division and the consumer credit division. And the consumer credit division is the division under which auto financing is organized. So moving on a little bit, just tell you a little bit more about the consumer credit division. So we regulate any extension of credit to Indiana consumers. So we regulate other financial services. We administer 8 state statutes, 1 administrative rule. The largest part of our job and what law applies to all of you and for a lot of the other industries we regulate for financing purposes is the Indiana Uniform Consumer Credit Code. Here's the legal citation. And Chapter 2, which is consumer credit and consumer leases, are typically going to be where most of you will fall. We also regulate for compliance with federal regulations, and those typically are for disclosure purposes. So primarily truth in lending. This won't be a surprise to any of you. Truth in lending says this is how you have to disclose to a consumer charges, fees, and interest, and the way that form has to look, and in the way that the federal law requires. And then Federal Regulation M, which is on consumer leasing, is the federal leasing disclosure law that is that equivalent. So we have a territorial application, so our jurisdiction is limited. So we have jurisdiction over entities that are located within the state and those that are out of state that solicit and then engage in transactions with Indiana consumers in Indiana. So I know it was mentioned earlier, some cross-border activity. We certainly see that as well. So we regulate activity that's occurring in Indiana at Indiana locations. So we do a lot of administrative work too. And that typically consists of our registration of you all, licensing of some of our other types. We do examinations. We have annual renewal time, and then we also take and evaluate and consider consumer complaints. So we take consumer complaints for consumers for any industry regulated by our office. So what are some of our focuses? So when we come look at an auto dealer during an exam, what are we looking for? We focus a lot on maximum rates of interest, fees and charges. Those are all things that are dictated by Indiana law. Indiana law says you're allowed to charge this much's interest, you're allowed to charge these fees and these charges. Statutory limitations, prohibited practices, and then of course disclosures, which as we mentioned earlier tend to be federal in nature. We do have one state-specific disclosure for consumer leasing, and we'll talk about that in more detail a little bit later in the presentation. So here's just a little bit of an overview of the other industries, just for your information, that we regulate, and you'll see in bold, those are the areas that apply to you all. So financing transactions undertaken by auto dealers, retail credit sellers, purchasers, and lessors. So if you are offering financing in some form, then you're likely required to be registered with the department. So we'll go over in more detail what that requires. I mentioned this earlier, I'm a very visual person, so I like to make these graphs. So if you're doing consumer credit sales, then the IUCCC Chapter 2 applies to you, Federal Reg Z, consumer leases, the IUCCC Chapter 2, and Federal Reg M. So registration, in order to know whether your dealership is required to be registered with the department, it's important to know a little bit about these different transaction types. So a consumer credit sale is generally going to be defined as having some of the following characteristics. So a sale of a good or a service, basically extending credit to a person, not money, that's a loan, to purchase a good for personal, family, or household use, basically a consumer purpose. It's going to be payable in more than 4 installments or credit service charge, and the amount financed does not exceed $57,200. So that's a 2019 number. That number is subject to indexing adjustments. That just happens to be the current number. So typically a consumer credit sale document is going to be called a retail installment contract. So on the leasing side, a consumer lease is defined for the most part as having these characteristics. It's a lease of goods, a contract that, a contractual obligation that's greater than 4 months for a consumer purpose, and again, an amount payable that doesn't exceed the $57,200. One thing I would mention, you'll see my note on the slide, just to put on all of your radar, that if there's a contract for a consumer lease that's for less than 4 months, that is regulated as a rent-to-own transaction, and our rent-to-own title prohibits rent-to-own for motor vehicles. So I wanted to be sure to point that out to you all because we have an explicit prohibition in Indiana law that says you can't rent-to-own motor vehicles, and you cannot rent-to-own associated motor vehicle parts that are essential to operate a vehicle. So if you'd like to know more about that, I'd be glad to share some more information in that regard too. So again, a consumer lease is typically going to involve a consumer lease agreement as its formal agreement. And so in both instances, a registration is triggered, meaning that's what's required for you to register with our office by being what we call regularly engaged. So that means as a creditor, you're doing more than 25 transactions in a given year. So I'd like to talk a little bit about our registration, which we call a notice of intent form. I know there's a lot of words up here in terms of what this one document means, but just wanted to be sure that everyone knew what the state form was. State Form 83. We also have paper copies at our table. So if you think you may need to pick up a notice of intent form or you'd like to see a copy of it, I'd encourage you to stop by there and pick up a copy. So what this requires is within 30 days of extending any financing in Indiana as a creditor, either extending credit or doing lease activity, you're required to complete and submit this to our office. So after you submit this to our office, you're required to notify us when a few things occur. Pretty basic corporate changes, your name, address, principals, if you open or relocate or close, if you have a bankruptcy, if there's some kind of action by another regulatory agency, and then if there are certain felony convictions of someone who's in a position of trust in your organization. And then after I'll mention quickly too, after you file the notice of intent, it's our office policy to generally do your first examination within the first year after you register. We call our process examination, not audit. I know that you'll hear those terms used somewhat interchangeably. The reason we don't call our examination process an audit is because an audit at times suggests that we may be looking at everything that you have, and we don't do that. What we do is we take a sampling of your different kind of transaction types, and then we review that sampling for compliance. And so that's just a little bit different flavor than maybe what you've heard before, so I thought I'd mention that as well. So again, this is the annual filing. It's called the creditor's notification return for non-lenders. Again, a mouthful, I know. So every year what's required, because you don't pay an initial fee to register with us, which I also should have mentioned, but when you receive your annual filing, which you will receive a customized filing from our office every year, what you're required to pay is a volume fee. And so you're required to fill out the annual form, tell us who you're doing business with, confirm your business your business information, and then you're required to pay a volume fee, which is based on the volume of consumer credit sales and leases that you've done during the previous calendar year. So for 2019, that volume pay is $6 per 100,000. Will be due for transactions that are either retained, that's typically in a buy here, pay here situation, or for volume that's assigned out to other financing companies or financial institutions that are not registered with the department. So the first $100,000 of extended credit is exempt from the fee, and we have very detailed instructions that come with the form that tell you how to calculate your fee. And the reason for that is if there is an entity that is registered with our agency, they will often pay the volume fee for you on your behalf. And so you need to figure that out so you can deduct it out from what you will owe us for those contracts that you may retain. So the way you do that is on our website, we have an online services component. You go to find a license and consumer credit listings, and that will list with you the other entities that if they are registered or with our department, you're not required to pay volume fee for those entities you're assigning contracts to because they'll pay it for you. So if you have any questions at all about that during renewal season, it can be a little complicated. We try and do the calculation for you on the filing itself. Please don't hesitate to call us. We really want to be sure to assist you in getting it right, and we don't want you to be in a position of overpaying when you don't need to do that. I'll mention too that when our exam staff is on site, they do go over this with you and try and be sure that it was accurate and help assist you in being sure if there was an overpayment or an underpayment that gets taken care of. So I did want to mention here are the volume fees that are not required to be reported at all, and that are direct loans from other financing entities or institutions. So if you have somebody who comes in with either a check directly from their bank or their credit union, or if you have a business relationship where you are not listing yourself as the initial creditor, so sometimes that bank will directly list itself as the initial creditor, then you're not required to report volume. And then lender credit cards, also a similar situation, are not required to be reported because those are direct loans. So those are what's not required to be reported. Where you are listed, your dealership is listed as the initial creditor on the document, that is something you need to evaluate for whether or not it counts for payment toward the volume fee. Oh, I'll mention briefly too, if you are a buy here, pay here dealer and you don't assign any contracts, you're only going to report those transactions that your dealership retained and you originated, and any contracts that you receive as assignment to your business. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about our examination. I've mentioned a few things as we've gone along here, but just wanted to give you a little bit more information about what that process typically looks like. So as I mentioned earlier, the first exam is typically within the first 12 months of your notice of registration with our office. Subsequent routine exams typically occur every 36 months, and exams may occur more frequently, kind of on a case-by-case basis. So if there's an issue that comes up and it seems like it might be valuable to check in with you a little bit more often than 36 months, that's something that we'll be inclined to do. So what's an examiner going to do when they come to your business? Much as the comments you heard earlier from the Secretary of State's office, it really is our intention to be unobtrusive and not interrupt your daily business. And so to the extent you may have a spot for us, in a back room where we can have a plug-in and set up our equipment, we will do our best to be discreet while we're on site. So at the time of exam, an examiner is typically going to review the retail installment contracts that you have and the associated pay histories. They're going to review those contracts for compliance with rates of interest, fees, and charges under Indiana law, which is the IUCCC. and also for compliance with Federal Regulation Z, Truth in Lending, in terms of whether those interest rates and fees were disclosed properly the way the federal law requires. And then for consumer leases, going to be a similar approach. Those will be a review of the consumer leases, the associated pay histories, and then compliance with Federal Regulation M. One thing that's not on the slide that I should also mention is, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a state law disclosure that we will also evaluate for. And then we take a really close look at ancillary products. Those come in many forms, but the ones we tend to focus our review and efforts on are GAP products and then credit insurance. We also do an advertising review for compliance with Truth in Lending advertising requirements. And then we'll also take a look at repossession and judgment accounts. So before we dive right into kind of the meat of the Fed box and what these contracts look like, I just wanted to touch base on some of the terms, because these can be very confusing, and they are commonly confused and misunderstood. So what's an annual percentage rate? So we often know that as APR, and so that's the cost of your credit as a yearly rate. So this does include some interest and fees, but why do we do it as a yearly rate? The whole point of doing an APR as a yearly rate is that's our common denominator for consumers, so they can shop. And so for better or worse, that is the point of reference that has been adopted at the federal level and in most state levels too, to say, as a consumer, if I go shop for a car, I can look at the APR and I can compare it at this dealer for this vehicle to a different dealer for a same or similar vehicle. So what's the finance charge? So the finance charge is the dollar amount the credit is actually going to cost you. So this also includes interest and fees. So if the cost of a car is, $10,000 and I finance it, the APR plus certain fees and charges that are considered finance charges added together, how much is it going to cost me to finance that $10,000? It could cost me $2,300, it could cost me $3,200. It just depends on what the calculation and the fees and costs are that are included. And then amount financed. So the amount financed is the amount of credit that's provided to you or on your behalf. So the amount financed includes all the credit that's extended to the consumer in order to take that vehicle home that day. Okay, so here's a few things about retail installment contracts, which are for consumer credit sales. So again, Fed Reg Z, Truth in Lending disclosures, that's our major focus. We're really going to focus on the Fed box, which are titled Truth in Lending disclosures. Those are going to disclose things and are required to disclose these terms: APR, finance charge, amount financed, total of payments, and total sales price calculations. Truth in Lending also dictate that those disclosures have to be made in a certain format. I understand that is very technical, but that is the federal law requirement. So here are some examples of other required Reg Z disclosures: the identity of the creditor, the itemization of the amount financed, and if there are any credit insurance, property insurance disclosures. Those aren't necessarily part of the Fed box, but just wanted to bring that to your attention. And then we already talked about advertising. And then if you are interested at looking at the Reg Z requirements, I did this is just a tiny URL. It's just a reference URL that you should be able to go to, and it'll take you to the federal regulation online. And what's nice about it is if you go to the closed-in section, which is subpart C, that will tell you everything you need to know, that in the commentary about what disclosures are required, which ones may be optional. And then there's something called Appendix H, which gives you model forms. So if you've never taken a look at those model forms, they're a really nice point of reference for you to compare to maybe what you're using in your own shop. And so I would highly recommend you at least give that a look. It's pretty well organized, and it's pretty readable in plain English speak. So here's what those disclosures look like. So, couple common violations. Not checking the box for a prepayment disclosure in the Fed box results in the dealership not providing the prepayment disclosure, which is required. So, I know that's very deep in the weeds, but something that we see happen very often. So if a contract provides boxes to check in order to give this disclosure and the box is not checked, then that disclosure is not provided, and that's considered a violation. Another one that we see fairly often, and I'm sure we'll continue to discuss this as we go along, is for those of you who use a third party to charge and process electronic titles, known as the convenience fee. We often see folks lump that fee in with fees that go directly to the BMV as paid to public officials and the itemization of the amount financed, and that is not correct. That is not a fee that's paid to public officials. It's paid to those third-party processors. Oh, sorry, here's the box I was referring to. So in addition to Reg Z, retail installment contracts are going to be reviewed for compliance with state law, as I mentioned earlier. So a couple things to consider is that there are more, we do focus on Chapter 2, but there are various aspects and other chapters that pertain to consumer credit sales. So we have Chapter 1, which is just a definition section, but again, this is our point of reference as we evaluate, and it might be something you would like to familiarize yourself with. The department's authority to examine entities and to also assess remedies and penalties are going to be outlined in Chapters 5 and 6. And then Chapter 6 is basically our examination authority. And then Chapter 4 outlines certain insurance requirements regarding credit insurance. So I did want to talk briefly about the differences between simple interest and pre-computed interest. Indiana law permits you to do both, but just want to make sure folks understand what the ramifications of using one or the other business practice may look like. So simple interest basically accrues on an outstanding balance on a daily basis. So the consumer's payment record affects how much the consumer is actually going to pay. And then pre-computed is all calculated in advance on the assumption that all scheduled payments will be paid when due. So, some consumers prefer this because they know that there is going to be they know what that payment's going to look like on a consistent payment basis. So the consumer's debt is going to be the amount financed, which is the principal, plus the finance computed in advance. But what we see happen, and something to be mindful of, is if the consumer makes payments early or late, the finance charge doesn't change unless there's interest after maturity. So just a few things to talk about when we consider rebates, which we'll talk about here shortly as well. So maximum rate of finance charge. So in addition to ensuring that APR and finance charge and amount finance calculations are accurate according to Reg Z disclosures, an examiner is also going to ensure that a finance charge contracted for and assessed, if you're a buy here, pay here dealer, does not exceed the maximum rate that's allowed by law. So here's the structure. So currently the maximum rate for closed-end consumer credit can be expressed as either a blended rate, so the first $2,000 or less is 36%, the second is 21% between 2 and 4, and 15% on any amount that's above $4,000. It's a combination of those. I kind of think of it as similar to our income tax tiers. That's how that's figured. Or, to keep things simple, up to 25% per year on unpaid balances of the amount financed. Again, these are maximums. These are not, you're required to charge this much, and many of you charge lower amounts for varying reasons, but I just wanted to, for purposes of ease, it's just easier to say, here's the maximum amounts you're permitted. I would mention too that those $2,000 and $4,000 amounts are currently indexed and possibly subject to change. Our office is charged with doing some calculations every couple years based on CPI to determine whether those numbers change at all. So minimum finance charge. So now that we've talked about the ceiling, let's talk a little bit about the floor for finance charges. Excuse me. So we have a statute that says you're permitted to take a minimum finance charge of not more than $51 that you can contract for and assess in certain instances. So you're allowed to keep that up to $51, excuse me, if the debtor prepays in full, no matter if the transaction is pre-computed or not. If a finance charge is contracted for and doesn't exceed maximum rate, we talked about maximum rate in the previous slide. If the finance charge earned at the time somebody pays off their loan is less than the minimum finance charge you contracted for. And that $51 is also an indexed amount. So a couple of common violations we see that are related to maximum rates and minimum finance charges. So we often see finance charges contracted for in excess of maximum rate. So I would encourage you maybe after today to consider going back and just doing your own review of your finance documents and be sure that you feel comfortable that the rates that are being charged meet these criteria, both for maximum rate and for minimum finance charge. So again, another common violation we see is that the minimum finance charge, the $51, is actually in the contract for more than that amount. And then for buy here, pay here, here are some other specific common violations we see where the finance charge is assessed in excess of maximum rate, where the finance charges are assessed in excess of the amount that's actually contracted for. So somebody will say in the contract, you know, that your finance charge is something like $50, but they'll actually potentially impose something higher than that. Often these are system errors, software issues, and then again, a minimum finance charge assessed in excess of the amount contracted for. So that's another area I would definitely make sure to mention is, you know, appreciate that there are challenges with software and software vendors. We're all living in modern technology age, and it's certainly made businesses, doing business a lot, you know, more efficient. But something that we see happen pretty often is you might get a patch for your software or do an update, or your vendor may roll something new out, and it's just really important to make sure that there's a thoughtful review of what gets spit out after that happens. You know, I would encourage you, if you don't already as a practice, to consider running through some sample transactions just to be sure that it looks like what you expect it to look like and it's complying with, you know, your rates, fees, and charges. And, you know, going back to what Director Fite mentioned too, if you have any questions, if you would like us to come to your shop and, you know, go over that with you, if you would like to ask us questions or come in, we're always glad to assist you with that. We would much rather help assist you in setting you up for success than come in later and have to cite violations and have you issue refunds back to consumers. So finance charge rebate upon prepayment. So when consumers prepay, this is probably one of the areas that we see the most that is not always complied with in the way it needs to be for issuing rebates. So this is the statute for pre-computed, as I mentioned earlier. One must rebate the unearned portion of the finance charge if it's greater than $1. So again, if somebody prepays, it's really important to be sure you're running those calculations to be sure that there is a rebate due, that you're issuing that back to the consumer. So the rebate needs to be made according to the Rule of 78 and these other statutory provisions. So the basic point of reference here is if a transaction has a term that's greater than 61 months, then the finance charge rebate is computed by applying this contracted for APR that would yield the charge originally contracted for to the unpaid balance of the amount that was financed. I know that's complicated. We're always happy to talk to you. Most software systems will account for how to do this calculation. If you'd like to confirm that with us, we're happy to discuss that with you and assist you in being sure your software is using the right calculation. And again, as I mentioned earlier, a contracted for minimum finance charge may be retained in the certain circumstances that were already mentioned on the slide. So here are some common violations related to finance charge rebates. So insufficient rebates due to incorrect calculations by the software, not using the correct calculation method for transactions over 61 months, or not providing any finance charge rebates to consumers at all. So if these finance charge rebates are identified by you outside of an examination by our office, and again, if any assistance is needed, please don't hesitate to give us a call. I would mention too, just to take a little bit of break in some of the heavy information, that if I would invite you all to visit our DFI table, which is in the conference room across the hall. We have all kinds of advisories. We also have a little half sheet that gives contact information for myself, for our division supervisor, Scott Imbus, who's also here with us today, as well as our examination specialist, Aaron Sweet, who also works in the office with me. Joe Dean, who's one of our examination staff, is also at the table today. So if you know Joe or have had him at your shop, please stop by and say hello. So we'd like to go a little bit over the charge and fee limitations in Chapter 2. Delinquency charges changed recently, so I wanted to make sure to take an opportunity to go over that with all of you. If after today you'd like to know more about that, a copy of this advisory that we published about delinquency charges, we have copies at our DFI table. So before July 1st, the delinquency charge, the maximum delinquency charge you could contract for was $19. It was indexed, subject to change, and there was a minimum 10-day grace period that you were required to give the consumer before you impose that $19. So after July 1st, these are the new amounts that you may contract for new agreements. This isn't necessarily applicable to your old agreements, okay? So this is for new agreements after July 1st. So you can see that 14-day installments is only going to permit a $5 delinquency charge. Again, that's weekly. And then a $25 if installments are due every 15 days or 30 days. The minimum 10-day grace period has stayed the same. And the piece I really wanted to be sure to tell you about is that before July 1st, that $19 was subject to the indexing. I mentioned earlier that our office is required to make changes to that based on calculations every couple years. These $5 and $25 delinquency charges are no longer subject to indexing. So they are flat fees. So if you had old contracts that said you could take up to $19 or a maximum amount permitted by the indexed statute, that doesn't give you the ability to now charge $25, because $25 is for new contracts going forward. So if you have any questions about that, I'd be glad to chat with you more about that. Again, I would encourage you to take a look at the advisory, which I think gives a pretty nice job of laying out those issues. So a couple other charge and fee limitations, just to continue talking a little bit about delinquency charges. Those can generally continue to be collected only once per installment, no matter how long a loan might be in default. Some of you are familiar with the current installment rule. The current installment rule is no longer in effect for payments that are made after July 1st. And so it's no longer in effect. We will continue to evaluate it and review it to be sure it was being complied with before July 1st. And then we'll make decisions on that on a case-by-case basis. So permitted additional charges. This is another area that we see a lot of violations in, and it's also very commonly misunderstood. So these are charges that are incidental to the extension of credit. What does that mean? It means that we're imposing them. They're being imposed only on people who are taking credit. They're not being imposed as charges for people who are doing a cash deal. But they can be contracted for and received in addition to the finance charge. So our state law says you can have a finance charge, and then you're allowed to have all these additional charges, and there's a list in the statute, you don't have to include that list of permitted additional charges in your finance charge. So that's the value of it, is you're allowed to have a finance charge and you're allowed to have permitted additional charges. Well, why is it set up that way? It's set up that way because these are generally considered charges that generally represent fees that are naturally going to be related to a credit transaction. So I mentioned earlier public fees to officials. So, certainly there's going to be BMV fees that are naturally paid as part of the purchase of a vehicle. And so those are considered additional charges. You're allowed to charge those and not include them in the finance charge. So an important piece that needs to be considered, however, and where we see a lot of violations occur, is you have to consider both state law and federal Reg Z for disclosure when contracting for fees. So the state law is going to require that a seller disclose information by Reg Z. So you have to define finance charge. In state law, we also call that the credit charge, the credit service charge. So charges that are imposed uniformly on cash and credit transactions are not considered finance charges. They're considered part of the cash price. So if it doesn't matter who walks in the door, if there is a cost that's included, whether someone buys that particular vehicle for cash or for credit, those associated fees will likely be considered part of the cash price. So be sure that you have policies and procedures in place and your staff is trained on how to treat certain charges. If there are charges that you're imposing that are not listed in the additional charges statute, those are required to be treated as finance charges, and you need to be sure that those are being properly treated as finance charges, because if they're not treated as a finance charge and they're not a listed permitted additional charge, then you're going to be required to make a refund. So again, I would encourage you to look at the convenience fee advisory. Knowing that this was been a big issue in the industry, we put out an advisory last year kind of explaining if you have a fee, we use the service provider electronic titling and registration convenience fee as an example. Here are ways in which you can treat this fee to be sure that you're properly disclosing it and properly treating it under both state and federal law. Okay, retail installment contracts, consumer credit sales. We're just talking about a few more options. I think we've we've exhausted our permitted additional charges here, but here's the additional charges statute. If you'd like to make a reference so you understand which charges are permitted in addition to the finance charge. So an examiner is also going to review retail installment contracts and payment histories, as I mentioned earlier, to see what charges are being contracted for and taken in the event of default. So we have a statute that permits certain default charges and prohibits default charges. So except for reasonable expenses incurred in repossessing the vehicle, the seller is really generally going to be prohibited from contracting for getting any increase in an APR as a result of default. So again, default charges are prohibited. That is different than fees or costs related to repossessing a vehicle. So repossession fees. Something else we'll take a look at during examination are repossessions that you have in your file, as well as judgments. So we have a statute that outlines the reasonable expenses that can be imposed in doing a repossession. It states that those expenses need to be reasonable, and to the extent that they're in your agreement, not prohibited by law, and that there are reasonable attorney's fees incurred by you. So these are permitted for self-help repossessions only if you take possession of a car. So we do see scenarios where you may have paid a company to go repo a vehicle for you, but then you work something out with the dealer, or excuse me, you work something out with the consumer, and then you don't end up repossessing the vehicle. So you can only recoup those expenses in the situation where your dealership actually took possession of the car. And I would also encourage you to be sure that any repossession that you're doing is in line with what you've agreed to in your contract. So as part of our exam process, I would encourage you to be sure you're maintaining documentation of those expenses so we can take a look at them at the time of exam. So something else that's a little bit more obscure, most of you are probably familiar with, are repossession fees and actions in terms of related to what you have the ability to recoup from the consumer after you have a repossession scenario. So we have a state law that says if the price of the goods that you repoed or that was given back to you was $4,000 or less, then the buyer is not responsible for the seller's unpaid balance. So if you take the car back, you don't have the ability to then file a small claim to recoup any extra money you're owed. Now, the trade-off for that is you're not obligated to resell the collateral and apply it to the consumer's balance.
Can you repeat that about the $4,000?
Sure.
Thanks.
So, do you want me to just go over it a little bit more?
Yeah.
Sure. So, if the cash price of the goods repossessed or surrendered was $4,000 or less, then the buyer is not personally liable to the seller. Okay, so the buyer is the consumer, the seller being you all, for the unpaid balance. The trade-off being that the seller is not obligated to resell the collateral and then apply it to the outstanding balance. You can, but what typically and often happens is you would repo the vehicle, sell it, apply it to the balance, and then pursue the borrower for the remaining amount. This just says this is the scenario where you can do all of that, except you can't, if the value of the car is less than $4,000, you can't file that small claim to take care of the rest of the balance. Does that help? Yeah.
So most of this is related to buyer pay here, but in the instance of a first payment default with like a Westlake or Western or something like that, and it's less than $4,000, are we allowed to? Because I wasn't the lien holder on sale. The lien holder was actually like Westlake, and I was on a first payment recourse with them. So I have to go repossess the car. Now the car's back in my name.
Mm-hmm.
Can I go sue small claims if that's the case? Because I wasn't the original obligator of the.
Sure. If you don't mind, I would ask you to stop by the table, or maybe we can talk about that kind of offline, because your question's a good one, but it's pretty, I think, detailed. So I want to make sure to get you the right answer. Thanks for your question.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
is it $4,000 at the time of the initial purchase of the vehicle, or what's remaining balance, what's left on the loan?
I believe it says the cash price. So I would have to go back and reference this.
It's at the time of the sale.
It's at the time of the sale, okay, that's what I thought, yeah. It's at the time of the sale. Thanks, Scott. Okay, so just related to attorney's fees in a repo situation, you're allowed to recoup reasonable attorney's fees after default and referral to an attorney that is working for you that's not salaried. But those can only be recouped as a result of the consumer's default, similar to what I mentioned earlier. So a couple other common violations related to charges and fees. Contracting for charges in excess of amount permitted, number allowed. I think we've gone through some of these. Assessing charges in excess of the amount number contracted for. That's one we see specifically for buy here, pay here. And then again, on permitted additional charges, contracting for a charge is a permitted additional charge as if it was in that list, but it's not listed in the statute. So here's a couple of examples of that. I did want to make sure to bring those to your attention. Convenience fees, processing fees, things like document fees. All right, so now I'd like to talk a little bit about ancillary products, and we're at the tail end, I promise. So a little bit of a distinction, we've had some changes in GAAP in the last year or two, so thought it'd be worth just mentioning those. So before June 30th of 2018, GAAP programs were required to be reviewed and approved by our office in order for them to be a permitted additional charge. So we looked at those we looked at the agreements to make sure they included certain provisions and also that they had certain refund requirements. So before 2018, in order to offer a GAAP product, a dealer had to determine if that GAAP program had been approved by our office, and then new programs were approved individually on a case-by-case basis for different max charges and refunds depending on the product type. So there was a big change last July in that. So now, previously, GAAP was all just approved by policy through our office, and now it's in the statute. So it's very straightforward and clear what conditions have to be met in order to offer a GAAP product as an additional charge. So there's general disclosures and document requirements. Our goal was really to be consistent in what was being required or treated before 2018 and then make sure that the statute reflected that. The one big change is that there's no GAAP fee maximum of charge for refundable products. Again, just wanted to emphasize that refundability piece. For non-refundable products, there is a $400 maximum charge permitted. Here's where you can go to our website and see a copy of some guidance we put out on that, and we do have some copies at the table. So if you're interested to know more about what changed, then I would encourage you to go pick up a copy of that. So we do a GAAP agreement review as part of our examination process to be sure that all the required disclosures are being met. Excuse me. And one of our continued focuses for GAAP products is that those products continue to meet the 80% rule. So that was, the 80% rule was required both before when GAAP was approved by policy, and also it continues to be required to be an additional charge now that GAAP products are in statute. So the GAAP agreement cannot be sold if the amount financed, not including the cost of the GAAP agreement or the cost of any credit insurance or warranties or service agreements, is less than 80% of the MSRP for new motor vehicles or NADA average retail value for used motor vehicles. And this is copied directly from the statute. So that's something that we always review if you're offering GAAP products at your shop, and particularly in regards to the 80% rule. So GAAP refunds. If a GAAP charge is greater than $400, as I mentioned, the product has to be refundable. So what does that mean? That means the consumer can cancel the agreement and obtain a refund of the unearned GAAP charge before prepayment in full, at the time of prepayment. So upon prepayment in full, the GAAP coverage is automatically terminated and that unearned gap charge has to be refunded to the consumer. So a gap charge refund has to be calculated on a method no less favorable than refund calculation on a pro rata basis. And the seller of the gap agreement, again, who's going to typically be the dealer if this is a product that you offer or that you offer through one of your partners, is responsible for making those refunds. So the seller of the gap agreement must retain records regarding gap agreements that are sold, refunded, and expired. And I want to put a little asterisk here because this is still the case even if you assign that contract. You as the dealer are considered the original creditor, and so our law dictates that you're the one responsible for maintaining records and also issuing those refunds. Credit insurance refunds are also similar. So here's how refunds are calculated for credit insurance. The refund must be issued if the insurance provided for a term shorter than the term for the premium, or the credit insurance terminates at the end of the scheduled term due to prepayment. Again, we see a lot of things happening at prepayment that need to be tested, calculated, reviewed. So the refund method for credit insurance products has to be calculated according to a method approved by the Department of Insurance. And the Department of Insurance has said that the refund formula has to be at least as favorable as the rule of anticipation. And here's the administrative code statute for that reference. If you need assistance with that, please don't hesitate to call our office. We'd be glad to help you with that. I'm sure the Department of Insurance would also be glad to help you navigate that. So I want to talk a little bit about the electronic database. So we talked earlier this morning with Secretary of State's, oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I have a question about, so since the dealer's responsible, why is it that about a year ago when all this changed, all banks decided, or most of the banks have decided, that they're the ones that are going to be responsible and they're the ones that are making the refunds and causing the dealer a great deal of grief over that refund? Because it's very difficult when they constantly are charging you back for these refunds when you find out that you've already done it. Allied Bank, for one, says that the Department of Financial Institutions is the one that told them they had to be responsible.
So did everybody hear that question? So when you have contracts that get assigned from the dealer onto the finance company or the financial institution, and we're aware of some situations where banks or finance companies have agreed to do the refund on your behalf. We try and be sure to coordinate those efforts to the extent we are able to do that, so we don't have circumstances that result in double payment or overpayment. So, again, I can't speak to, maybe what you were told by the creditor you mentioned briefly, but our jurisdiction is always over the dealer, and whether the dealer demonstrates to us that they've made the refund or whether they can show us that someone who the gap agreement's been assigned to or the contract's been assigned to has made that refund on their behalf, we're equally satisfied. Because our only concern is that the consumer gets the refund that was due to them. So
It's just more difficult for the dealer when the bank is doing it.
Sure.
They're all acting like the Department of Financial Institutions is the one that directed them to do it.
Yeah, well, if you have a point of contact, I would encourage you to invite them to call me, and I'd be glad to have a discussion with them about what our expectations are. Thanks for your question. Go ahead.
Is there any written notification that the consumer must provide to the dealer requesting that refund on that gap? And if so, what's the window that they need to provide that information?
Sure, great question. So the question was, is there a requirement by the consumer to notify the gap provider that they're due a refund? And the answer is, it depends. So the reason the answer is it depends is we have the statute says that the contract or that the product is automatically terminated at prepayment. So that suggests that there is not a consumer requirement to do a notice. You could potentially have something in your agreement. That's up to you and, your GAP agreement provider about what communication may need to occur. There is no stated time frame, although I will say that we have an interest penalty statute that says that if a consumer is not given their refund within 30 days of that, or excuse me, 60 days after prepayment, then there's a statutory interest penalty due to that consumer. Again, our office is a little different because we evaluate those. We don't represent consumers directly, but we do evaluate whether or not GAP refunds have been timely made in terms of whether that consumer may be additionally owed that interest penalty. So it is very important to maintain the database and keep it updated on a regular basis. Really, it's the area that we see that causes the largest number and amounts of refunds is because the database may be a little bit outdated. So you have to maintain as a dealer an electronic spreadsheet of some kind. Our preference is that it be in Excel. You're not required to have it in Excel. If you have a software provider that gives you all this information and it's sortable and can be shared with our examination team, we're just fine with that. We would encourage you, if you're using something other than doing your own Excel tracking, to just touch base with our office and be sure that it contains all the information that's needed and that we get a chance to give you some feedback that it's going to be fine. So a little bit more on the cancellation and things of that nature. So let's see here. So at the time of cancellation, and again, these are going to be different depending on the GAP or credit insurance, the database needs to be updated, okay? So it needs to reflect the date of cancellation, the amount of the GAP or the credit insurance refund, the check number, and to whom that check was sent. So here are some optional items that we recommend that could help assist you all in expediting our exam and also may be helpful to you in terms of your own tracking. Certificate number, the dealership, if there's some multi-office processing, the amount financed, the value, and any other entry you think might be appropriate. And again, these should be monitored and maintained on an ongoing basis and updated at least monthly. So back to the earlier question about refunds being made on the dealer's behalf. As I mentioned, our jurisdiction is on the dealer, so we consider the dealer still responsible for maintaining that database. And again, it's not separately required if your software can access that information that we need to review. Just talking about reserve statements and payoffs, again, as we talk about assigning agreements out, it is essential that that you all are receiving those with the finance companies or financial institutions with which you have relationships and agreements, that they are regularly providing reserve statements and payoff letters to you. And that is certainly something that we see happen consistently between certain finance companies or financial institutions. And we really, we get the question a lot like, well, what if I just can't get that information? And so we have a process where we assist you in making efforts to obtain that information. But if not, then there's always an alternative to directly sending the consumer a letter basically informing them that they could be entitled to a refund and just explaining to them how to do that. And again, referencing back what I mentioned earlier about the statutory penalty, if those refunds aren't made within 60 days, there's a statutory interest penalty. And there's also a related calculation on that. Again, please feel free to call our office if you're trying to figure out what that interest penalty calculation, if you're doing it accurately. There is a statute in place, but we're always glad to help. So just to talk a little bit about consumer leases, and then we're gonna wrap it up. So federal Reg M, certain information required to be in the disclosures, property, amount due, payment schedule, other charges, the calculation, early termination notice. Federal Reg M, Part 1013 is gonna be your required disclosures. Again, I have a tiny URL you can go to. It'll take you straight to Reg M, so you can see all of those. So these are gonna be substantially similar in terms of some of the truth in lending requirements. Check out the model form, which is in Appendix A if you go to this URL. It's a great point of reference. And then I wanna make sure to mention, here's the Indiana required disclosure that's required to be in the contract. There's the statutory site, and here's the information at the top. So this is a lease agreement, not a purchase agreement. This language is required to be in any lease with an Indiana consumer. And that's just a copy of the Reg M box and disclosures. Just mention briefly disguised credit sales. We did a couple other advisory letters on lease here, pay here models. And we also did an administrative interpretation on lease-to-own transactions. Those are more applicable to rent-to-own models. But again, just wanted to mention those. We have copies available at our DFI table. Here's just some lists of information that might be helpful to you. Our DFI website, I encourage you to go there and check it out. We have a lot of information under our licensing and application area. Here's a consumer credit code, also referenced on our website. And as Director Fite mentioned earlier, we're really trying to get a lot of information out there, publications, advisories. Most of the ones all the ones I've mentioned today, there are copies of at our table, but they are also listed on our website. And in addition to our contact information, we have a short flyer that also has a copy of all this information, how to get to our website and all of this, all of these other references. So again, thank you so much for your time today and for your attention. Yes?
Just one quick question.
Sure.
Early on, you listed what's considered a consumer credit sale and what's considered a consumer lease.
Uh-huh.
And it was amounts less than $57,000.
Yes.
I mean, we have contracts that are more than $57,000. So
Sure.
what do I need to be aware of with that?
Can I ask you to stop by our table, and I'd be glad to chat with you about that. But basically, that's just the regulatory threshold that we look at it. Yeah. Is there another question?
Well, I want to know the answer to that too.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, sure. Scott, is there anything that I should add on that?
Basically, the state law and the federal law both say that if the transaction, if the amount financed is less than that dollar amount, then it's not subject to those regulations. So if you're selling a vehicle and the amount financed is greater than that dollar amount, it's not subject to truthful lending, and it's not subject to the consumer credit code.
Okay, did everybody catch that? So if the amount financed or leased is above the 57.2, then it's not subject to truth in lending or state law UCCC requirements that we mentioned today. All right. Thank you all for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Hello. How's everyone? Doing very well. This has been very nice. I do want to thank the Secretary of State's office for organizing this event. Have you enjoyed having all of the divisions together for the questions? So when you get the opportunity to do the survey, go ahead and give us some really good feedback, and we can do it again next year, okay? And if there's something that we didn't offer you or cover for you, then please put that in the surveys also, because we want to do our best to give you information that's relevant to what you're doing. Well, my name is Melinda Bates, and I work for the Indiana Department of Revenue, and I have worked for the Department of Revenue since 1992. I hired in as a regional office secretary. I worked that for 3 years out of the Kokomo District Office. Then I was a field auditor for over 20 years and did a lot of auto dealerships and other types of audits. And it was very, very interesting. When I told people what I did for a living, they're like, ooh, you're an auditor. And I'm like, I really, really love it. And I genuinely mean that, because I got to meet lots of cool people and see businesses and see how people overcome obstacles. And I like people. People are more cold than the taxes. But then the last 2 years, I've been in audit training, and I do outreach presentations. So hopefully, we'll bring some information that's relevant to car dealers today. It'll help you guys. We make every attempt to bring good information that's relevant to your industry, understanding that sometimes misinformation gets put out or that situations change. It's not that we provide bad information, it's that sometimes the laws change or sometimes your situation isn't exactly like the example and the facts of your situation change the taxability of an issue. So whenever you're confused or you don't understand a taxable decision, contact somebody with the Department of Revenue, and we are here to help you understand. Knowing that tax laws are complex and we all go different places to find information, I wanted to share with you that one of my coworkers was searching online in a tax blog yesterday, and she pulled up a tax blog and it said that in Indiana, a vehicle sales can never collect more than $375 tax. That's good. I say that is not true, so be careful where you get your information. And that type of information, misinformation, reminds me of my favorite Abraham Lincoln quote. In 1864, Abraham Lincoln said, "The problem with internet quotes is that you can not always depend on their accuracy." So anyway. So be careful getting your internet information because it's not always accurate. Okay, today we're going to talk about some different topics when an automobile dealership would interact with the department. You might interact with the Department of Revenue for registration assistance, for your in-tax reporting systems and payments. We want to talk to you a little bit about Project Nextdoor. It's our new reporting system. You may need to talk to us about sales tax guides, use tax guides, tire fees, motor vehicle rental excise taxes, protests or collection processes, or possibly talk to us about audits. These are all topics that the Indiana Department of Revenue can help you with and assist you. If you have technical tax questions today, we will have people at the table again at the end of the conference to help you with individual tax questions. If you have general tax questions, I'll be able to take care of those at the end of the presentation, but we don't want to talk about specific taxpayer situations in a large crowd. We want to protect your privacy. So, sales tax registrations. Before conducting a retail sale, a business is required to register with the Department of Revenue. You need to obtain a registered retail merchant certificate. Does everybody in this room have a registered retail merchant certificate? Yeah, there you go. You guys know this. This allows you to collect and remit sales tax as required by the Indiana Department of Revenue. You register a new business online at the InBiz site. So that is the website. At InBiz, you can register your entity with the Secretary of State if necessary, and you can set up appropriate tax accounts with the Department of Revenue. There's a $25 registration fee for sales tax, but you can register withholding and other similar taxes on this site. Once your application is completed and submitted, the Department of Revenue will contact you within 48 hours regarding the status of your application. Sometimes you have to provide additional information. If all of your returns are filed, your sales tax account will automatically renew every 2 years. If you're behind, if you have missing periods or you have outstanding liabilities, then we're going to send you a letter right before your account would expire, and we're going to give you an opportunity to clean up those issues. If everything's cool, it's going to flow forward. You're not going to get your account canceled, and there will be no additional fees. It will automatically renew. The Indiana Department of Revenue has an e-business mandate. We require all businesses in Indiana to file and pay your sales and withholding taxes electronically. You can use our online system called InTax, or you can use another electronic method, but you are required to remit electronically. We do have a few exceptions. One of them would be if you have a religious belief that keeps you from using a computer, if there's a policy within your organization that forbids you from using electronic transfers, or if you have absolutely no computer access, you can apply for an exemption. I don't think that would apply to anyone in this room, but just be aware it's out there, and there is a departmental notice number 36 that gives you the information if you know of someone that needs to apply for this electronic filing exemption. InTax. InTax is the department's reporting system. This is where you remit and pay your sales tax. Does everybody use sales tax? InTax for your sales tax vouchers. You enter your payments and you enter your vouchers. And this is a free way to comply with the electronic mandate. InTax application is Indiana's free online tool to manage your business tax obligations. All of these tax types can be reported and remitted within InTax. Some additional benefits not everyone is aware of. You can view a history of all of the returns filed within your InTax account. You can send secure messages to the Department of Revenue if you need to amend or you need information about something that's been filed. You can register for and use electronic funds transfer options. You can get immediate access to the Department of Revenue to do your filing. When I worked in the district office in the late 1990s, we would have people standing at the door in the morning when we were getting ready to unlock the office because they knew they were late with their sales tax payment and they had to hurry up and get it to the office when it opened because the offices were only open from 8 to 4:30. It was difficult. So one of the things the department has offered is electronic remittance. So you can do it when you remember at midnight, you can do it at midnight. If you need to do it 2 hours before the office opens, you can do it electronically. You can also register a new business. If you decide not to use InTax, you should have a third-party vendor manage your tax obligations. Some examples would be ADP or QuickBooks. Or you can have a professional manage your tax obligations. Tax professionals will still file and pay electronically on your behalf. Okay, next door. We have the Department of Revenue is modernizing or implementing a new processing system. It is a 4-year rollout, and it's going to update processes such as revenue accounting, account maintenance, payment services, returns processing, portal services, and disbursements. This project began in 2018. A group came in, computer experts, and they helped analyze the processes that we currently did, and they implemented a plan to implemented a rollover plan that's going to be phased in over 4 years. The first phase in is Rollout 1. Rollout 1 will be September 3rd of 2019, just a few short months away. And the taxes that will be shifted to the new system will be aircraft excise, corporate income, financial institutions, and utility receipts. This group may see the need to use the corporate income tax if you're part of that filing for your businesses. And then 1 year later, the rollout in September 8th of 2020 will be the sales tax, the withholding, and the tire fee. So this will directly impact your jobs. 1 year from now, you'll be using this to report your sales and use tax. There'll be a customer interface. You'll be able to go in and get information. And it's pretty cool. It's very exciting stuff. Rollout 3, September 11th of 2021. And the taxes within this group will probably be individual income that affects you the most. Your individual incomes, or possibly your shareholders of your companies, have to report individual income. So that's in September of 2021. And Rollout 4. And that's going to be where the gasoline use tax, if you remit that, and the motor vehicle rental excise tax are the types that will affect this group. I will tell you that I've walked through several of these modules in a training environment, and it's a very impressive system. It's logical, it makes sense, it's easy to follow, and it contains many helpful features so that we can help us help you. So be ready for that. There will be a lot of information when we start utilizing that system. Okay, so now, most of the questions that we had at the table today were related to sales and use tax. How many of you have a few areas of sales and use tax that are sometimes sketchy, you do your best, but you're not sure quite how to handle it? Well, only 2 people. Wow, you guys are good. I'm going to hand the mic over. Okay. So we're going to discuss some frequently asked questions and provide you some guidance on a few new issues that will affect automobile dealers. So, new and used vehicle sales. If a vehicle or a trailer is purchased from a registered Indiana dealer, the dealer must collect sales tax and provide the purchaser a completed ST-108 form. The 108 form allows them to show the BMV that sales tax was properly paid. All vehicles sold in Indiana, and the key here is sold in Indiana, are subject to Indiana sales tax, even if the purchaser intends to immediately register or license that vehicle in another state. There is a brand new piece of legislation, brand new. It just came out. We're analyzing it and looking into it. But evidently there are things, there are vehicle sharing organizations, things such as Turo and Get Around. Have you guys heard about these? It's new to me, but it's the new thing. We've had a lot of questions about it, and there is a brand new piece of legislation. It was in House Enrolled Act 1001 that was just recently passed. And they have determined that the sharing of a vehicle in a sharing platform is subject to sales tax. There is not a transaction occurring that would make it exempt. There's no exempt purpose. And so it will be subject to sales tax, but it will not be subject to auto rental excise tax. There'll be more information coming out on this topic, and you can expect to see a new vehicle sharing tax go into effect January 1st of 2020. It's not on the slide, but it will be 2020. Okay, so let's go back to discussing retail sales. New and used vehicles. To receive an exemption, a purchaser must complete the ST-108E form and cite the reason that the vehicle is exempt. So the way the sales tax laws are written is everything is taxable unless you can document an exempt purpose. So with that in mind, your ST-108E is your exemption certificate, your get out of jail free card. If that person signs it and they give you the purpose, then you keep that in your deal jacket. Some possible reasons a vehicle could be exempt would be if it was be used directly in public transportation, or if it was purchased by a government entity, say a sheriff's department bought vehicles from your dealership. Those would be exempt because a government entity is exempt. On the back of the ST-108E lists the specific reasons that a vehicle could be exempted. And on the table in the other room, we have copies of those if you're curious about what types of things are exempt. But you can also pull a form off the internet, and on the back of the ST-108E gives you all the reasons a vehicle might be exempt. So for most circumstances, you're going to use the ST-108E. If you are buying a vehicle for your inventory, so you're buying a car to go in your inventory that you're going to resell, then you can supply a ST-105D. That's a dealer-to-dealer exemption certificate. The only caveat with the 105D is if you are approved to sell, and I don't want to insult anybody, but I'm just going to say Chevy as an example. If you're approved to sell Chevys and you issue a ST-105D to a BMV dealer, that is not going to be valid. You can only issue a 105D to purchase a vehicle exempt if it's allowed to be in your inventory and be sold and be allowed to be sold under your franchise. So whatever your franchise is approved to sell, you can use the 105D for that. Does that make sense? Okay. New and used vehicle sales. If a motor vehicle is moved and titled in another state within 30 days, the sales tax rate imposed by that other state or country may apply. If so, the dealer should collect the tax and remit it to the Department of Revenue. Now, this situation gets a lot of questions. We get a lot of questions about this. So what happens is you'll have a dealer in Indiana, and he'll offer a car for sale to someone that lives in another state. We'll just use Kentucky. So somebody from Kentucky, that's a Kentucky resident, comes to Indiana and purchases a vehicle. The Indiana dealer is required to collect Indiana tax. However, they are allowed to collect it at the other state's rate. It is an Indiana tax, but they're allowed to reduce it to the other state's rate, so keep that in mind. Since July 1st of 2014, this has been the rule. The seller will collect sales tax at the rate the purchaser would have paid in the state the vehicle will be registered in within 30 days. The rate charged will include only the state sales tax, not any local jurisdictional state tax or other taxes. So the equivalent of the sales tax in the other state, whatever rate that may be, is what you as an Indiana dealer collects. You remit that to Indiana. We get a lot of questions on this because someone will go to plate the vehicle in the other state and there'll be an additional fee, even though they take their form and they prove that they've already paid tax on it. Oftentimes, I'm not going to say always, but oftentimes that other fee is a county fee or a property tax fee or a wheel tax fee. It's something completely different. They only have to give credit for sales tax paid, not those other types of taxes. All state tax collected at whatever rate you're collecting it should be remitted to the Department of Revenue on the ST-103 CAR form. The reason we use a CAR form is because it accounts for the varying rates. It allows you to remit the tax and not across the board at the 7% rate. Dealers and customers also must complete Form ST-108NR. That means non-resident. And you need to retain a copy of that for your records. Most commonly, we find these forms in the deal jackets. And it explains why a rate less than 7% was collected on that deal. So that documents, and oftentimes they make a copy of the driver's license and other resident papers to prove that that person was a resident of the other state. And then that person has to sign that form and promise that they will register it in the other state. So the copy of the 108NR should go with your customer and one should be retained in your deal jacket. An Indiana dealer will only be required to collect sales tax at the destination state's rate up to the Indiana rate of 7%. You never collect more than 7%, even if the other state's rate is 9 or whatever it may be. If the destination state or the county rate is greater than 7%, the maximum sales tax rate to be imposed here is always 7%. These rules apply to all transactions that are sourced to Indiana pursuant IC 6-2.513. I will tell you that there is another caveat. You could have a sale that is considered a sale in interstate commerce. And when you have a sale that is truly a sale of interstate commerce, Public Law 86-272 applies, and there is no sales tax on that transaction. However, a sale in interstate commerce means that no one came here and picked up that vehicle. They can't come here and pick up the vehicle and take it back to their state. They can't send someone to pick the vehicle up on their behalf. They can't even send a transportation company in to pick up that vehicle on their behalf. It has to be negotiated from a distance, and the dealership has to provide delivery of that vehicle in the other states. And we take a pretty good look at these because we've got some people that try to skirt the edge on that, and they say it's a sale in interstate commerce, but the person really just lives in the other state and sent somebody to pick it up here on their behalf. So that doesn't count. It has to truly be delivered sight unseen to that person in the other state. And as a dealer, you would need to keep clear notes, documentation, how it was delivered, where it was delivered, when it was delivered, when they requested it be delivered, all of those kind of things, so that you could prove that it was truly a sale in interstate commerce. Sometimes that's hard, but document it as best as you can. Okay? Yes?
Can we pay a Uber trade driver to take that car, or do we have to use a transportation company to deliver that car?
You can. You can pay a driver to deliver it, but then they need to keep hotel receipts, mileage receipts, some kind of documentation to prove that actually happened. So, and that's when it gets a little more difficult. But that is a common practice in your industry. They hire people to deliver vehicles. And that does happen. And as long as you've got clear notes in the deal jacket, you've got documentation of where they drove, how they drove, If they stayed overnight, that helps, but anything that can help you substantiate it. Yes?
Do we have to deliver it actually to their state or just to some point outside of Indiana, a specific address outside of Indiana, and then they can take delivery of it there?
Technically, it has to be somewhere outside of Indiana. We have had some situations where people would just like drive it across to a parking lot and the person would pick it up there, and we've won those cases. We fought those because it was an attempt to avoid the tax, not a true representation of that deal. So you need to document within your deal jacket a true representation of what happened, and make sure that it doesn't appear to be just avoiding the tax. Does that help? Those are tough because we've got people that skirt the line and that aren't really, they're just trying to avoid the tax. But if you've got clear documentation of where and how it was delivered, we'd prefer it to be to their residence, but we can't stipulate that. Anybody else have a question? Okay. That issue is most of our phone calls. The interstate commerce versus out-of-state delivery versus other states' rates. Okay, warranties. A few years ago, we had some issues with warranties, and they changed the law, and it's been pretty consistent. I think, from what I've heard, I think the dealers and the department are on the same page with this, but we're going to go over it just to make sure everybody understands the differences. Warranties. The original manufacturer's warranty and the dealer's warranty are not offered as an option. These are warranties that are part of the original transaction, as part of the negotiated deal when you sell that car. So technically, the sales tax is already on that. So the tax is collected up front when the person pays for the vehicle, and so the tax has been paid on an original manufactured warranty. The amount subject to tax includes any subsequent payments made by the purchaser, such as deductibles or fees, and any parts transferred to a buyer under the terms of an original manufacturer's warranty are not subject to sales tax. So the original warranty was part of the negotiated deal. Tax was collected on it. So we do not charge tax on the parts that are provided. So when they run through your parts department invoices, they're exempt, but you've got to be able to tie them back to an original warranty. So code them in such a way that we know they're an original warranty. All of this is in Information Bulletin number 2. Warranties. If a warranty explicitly states that a replacement vehicle will be provided while the warranty work is being performed, the rental transaction is exempt from sales tax. However, the fee charged for the rental is not exempt from auto rental excise, but it is exempt from Marion County supplemental excise tax. So it gets a little tricky when it comes to the rental excise taxes, but for sales tax purposes, if that warranty says they're going to provide that person with a car while the work's being completed, then there is no sales tax on that rental. If the warranty does not explicitly provide for a replacement vehicle, then the provided vehicle is subject to sales and use tax. So when we're not sure, we'll pull out that warranty language and we'll just read, what does the warranty language promise? If it promises a vehicle will be provided, there's no sales tax. If it does not, then sales tax has to be charged on that rental vehicle, regardless if the dealership pays it or the customer. Usually the dealership provides it because you guys are nice, right? Okay. Optional warranty contracts are contracts that act as insurance against potential future repair costs, including extended service contracts. These are not subject to sales tax. However, these could have use tax implications on the parts that are provided at a later date. We'll talk about that on the use tax side. So, if the warranty is subject to tax, the parts provided are not. If the warranty is not subject to tax, then the parts provided are subject to tax. So you gotta, again, as it runs through your service department, you gotta keep track of which parts are going on which types of warranties. Any questions about warranties? Okay. I thought this industry had that under does a really good job. You guys do a really good job on that. The lease of any motor vehicle. We're going to talk about leases. How many people do leases? I know a couple of used car dealerships do not, so several in the crowd. Handle leases. The lease of a motor vehicle or trailer is subject to sales and use tax unless the transaction is entitled to a statutory exemption. So that means every transaction is subject to tax, like we talked about with the sales, unless you have a specific purpose for it being exempt, which again would be something like a not-for-profit agency is using it for their not-for-profit cause, or public transportation. Any of the things that are exempted for a retail sale of a vehicle could also be exempted use for a lease. Taxability of a lease, so the state that is allowed to tax it, is not determined by where the vehicle is purchased. A lease is a little bit different in that the property location per terms of the agreement is the state that gets the tax. So if somebody leases a vehicle from an Indiana dealer, but they're going to maintain that vehicle in Ohio or some other state, wherever the vehicle is garaged, we call it, wherever the primary location of that vehicle is the state that gets the tax on a lease. You're going to collect it when you do the deal up front on that down payment, but you're going to send that tax to the leasing agency, and they're going to get it back to the proper state. It's all in that initial transaction, and then they're going to collect the tax for that other state after that point. When it's an Indiana lease, you're going to go ahead and collect the Indiana tax on that initial down payment, and you're going to go ahead and remit that to Indiana because you're registered with Indiana, and you're the ones that have a hold of it. You're going to send it to us. So it's only different if it's another state. You have to remember that the auto dealer acts as an agent for the lessor, the leasing company, in order to prepare and execute a lease arrangement between the lessee and the lessor. So it's really two transactions. It's you selling it to the leasing company and the leasing company leasing it to your customer. So leases with periodic payments. Leases requiring monthly payments are to be sourced to the primary location of the motor vehicle, and I just went over that. In most cases, the sales tax will be due to the state shown on the lease contract as a state where the motor vehicle or trailer will be licensed for highway use. Leases without periodic payments. Leases without periodic payments are treated the same way as the sale of a motor vehicle. That entire transaction is occurring in Indiana before they take it. The payments, everything is arranged here. The transaction is Indiana. It's handled the same as a sale would be, and no other states are involved. They take possession of it here. They arrange for it here. It's Indiana tax on an upfront lease with no further periodic payments. If the customer claims an exemption of the tax and the tax is not collected, you're going to again need to keep an ST-108E in the deal jacket, and the lessor must complete the exemption certificate and keep it with the records. That one we've already talked about. And that we've already talked about. If no exemption applies or you don't have documentation of the exemption, then you need to collect the sales tax. Okay, any questions about leases? Cool. Okay. Sales tax as it applies to merchandise and parts. And again, sales tax, all transactions are subject to tax unless you can find an exempt purchase, an exempt reason. So everything that you sell, everything that's tangible personal property that you sell is subject to tax. And when a customer has an exemption, the exemption certificate should be maintained. So your parts department, for example, probably has a lot of exemption certificates. You maintain a lot of exemption certificates. A lot of times people ask, how often do we have to update our exemption certificates? And you'll get a lot of different answers depending upon who you ask. The law says the exemption certificate is good for the life of the business. So as long as that name, that responsible officer, that TID number is good, then that blanket exemption certificate is good for the life of the business. We recommend that people update their exemption certificates because sometimes people will change their structure. They'll keep the same DBA, but they'll change from a partnership to an LLC or from a corporation to another entity type. And they'll get a new exemption certificate, but you've dealt with this customer, you're familiar with them, you don't even think to ask because you didn't know they changed their structure. And so the exemption certificate you have on file for them is no longer valid. So most businesses that maintain a lot of exemption certificates like your industry, they'll update them every year or every 2 years just to make sure they don't get caught in one of those situations. So they have a valid exemption certificate for each customer's actual entity type. To protect yourself, I would do it every 2 years. Sublet repairs. Another topic that comes up in audits frequently is sublet repairs. So you'll have a repair ticket and there'll be a sublet repair and there'll be a one line item. And there'll be multiple things that could be in that sublet repair. So what we want you to do is look at that and if there is tangible personal property transferred, then that's taxable. If you don't maintain clear records as to what's included in that charge, then the entire thing is taxable. So if there's a sublet repair on your invoice, you're going to need to be able to break it down. We see a lot of things like towing, radiator repairs, the guys that come around and pull the dents out. Those kind of things are truly a service. So if you maintain that documentation, we're not going to tax that sublet repair item. If you don't have a clear trail, then we have no choice but to tax it. But then there are other situations like the windshield repairs, replacements, muffler repairs and replacements, and those do have some tangible personal property included in them and some labor. So if you keep that documentation, we're only going to tax the material portion of that. So sublet repairs seems like a small item, but if you've got multiple things happening, it can add up and it can be a material tax problem. So documentation is the key to protecting you. Okay, document fees. How many of you have heard that there's a change in doc fees? Everybody in the room? Yes, good. Good, I'm glad the word's getting out. Doc fees are taxable. Effective April 2019, doc fees are subject to state sales taxes. Fees charged for services performed prior to the customer taking physical possession of the vehicle or trailer are subject to tax. If you maintain adequate records to show which services pertain to the fees charged and the services performed after, we'll know what should be taxed and what should be exempted. The confusion comes in because we have two terms now. We have convenience fees and doc fees. Convenience fees are the fees that actually correlate to the registration requirements of the BMV. So if you have a customer and you take care of all their BMV paperwork, you do it for them, either electronically or you physically take it down, you're allowed to charge a convenience fee up to 150% of the actual BMV fee without collecting the sales tax on that. But if you have customers where you prepare the documents for them and you send them to the BMV themselves, you don't have a convenience fee. They're taking care of that themselves. So it's got to be directly attributed to the registration requirements of the BMV, and you have to take care of that on behalf of your customer. And the convenience fee can never be more than 150% of your true cost of that. So some dealerships won't have any convenience fees at all. Some have doc fees, and that's okay. You can have doc fees. That's the time and the effort that it took you to prepare all of the paperwork, the finance paperwork, all the paperwork required. And that's okay, but those doc fees are taxable. They're not directly attributed to the BMV fees. Anybody have questions on that? Great. There is an update on the RV front, and it's new legislation, and that's the only reason I'm talking to you about this today. RV rules related to sales tax and vehicle rules are different. They're not the same. But since there's a legislative update that's significant, we wanted to let you know in case people ask you about it. But anybody that has RV questions should seek guidance in Information Bulletin 72. And it is that the RV and trailer purchases by non-residents who intend to title the vehicle in a non-reciprocal state are subject to Indiana's 7% sales tax. Okay, so they're on to use tax. Who's familiar with use tax? Several of you. Use tax. Okay, use tax is a tax on any item stored, used, or consumed in Indiana. So if you can prove that you paid tax when you bought it, we're not going to assess it again. But if you bought something, say for inventory, think inventory. You bought things for inventory, you bought them exempt because you promised that you were going to collect the tax when you sold it or maintain an exemption certificate. So say some items are in inventory and you decide you need them. You need to pull them out of inventory and you need them in your business, then you would be required to pay use tax directly to the state on those items. Another time you may be required to pay use tax is you bought something off the internet or you bought something from someone that failed to collect the sales tax. And if your items were stored, used, or consumed in Indiana and tax was not paid, then you need to remit the use tax directly to the department. So some things that may affect your industry would be free oil changes. If you give away things free, you're pulling them out of inventory, you would remit the use tax on your cost, not the retail value, but on your cost. There may be dealer-owned vehicle repairs. If you have a vehicle that is on your asset list, if it's depreciated, then it is your vehicle. It is no longer in inventory. You got the benefit of the depreciation on that. It is your asset. There should be use tax paid on that vehicle. Fuel purchased to be used in dealer-owned vehicles would be subject to tax. Consumable supplies, so anything like if you have a body shop, for example, the rags, the oil dry, the cleanup things, anything that you keep in your business that your supply that doesn't go out the door with that vehicle is subject to use tax. There's Information Bulletins 28S and Information Bulletin 2 that help you with use tax issues. Some other things are promotional items. If you give away ink pens, Frisbees, those types of things. If you put balloons out, there's a dealership in Kokomo where I'm from, and it's got one of those crazy guys that blows in the wind. All of those kind of things are subject to use tax. And then optional warranty parts. Remember when we said if sales tax was not charged on the warranty when they purchased it, there is tax on the parts when they go into the vehicle. So a service warranty or something that was optional that you didn't have the customer pay tax on initially, those parts when they come through your service department should have use tax on them. And the key again is finding a good way to code that so you can sort out what's what. Software licensing fees. This one is difficult sometimes, but when you buy software and you maintain control of that and you put it on your systems, or even if you access it through the internet, if you have control of that program, it's subject to software licensing fees. They don't always collect the sales tax because they don't have a physical presence in Indiana. Some of that could change with Wayfair, but currently you're responsible for the use tax on all of that. So database fees. So we have a software licensing bulletin, information bulletin number 8, and it's been updated within the last 2 years. If you have not read that within the last 2 years, I would suggest you find a copy of that and read through it. I will let you know that items such as Carfax, credit reports, electronic sales leads, and mailing lists are considered pieces of information, not tangible personal property, and they are not subject to use tax. And that's, in years past, we had a different take on that. But currently, because of streamlined sales tax agreements and rules, then Carfax, credit reports, electronic sales leads, and mailing lists are not taxable in Indiana.
I have a question.
Yes?
Those promo items and say the pins that you give away to a customer or something, if you paid tax on when you bought them, then they're not going to be subject to use tax.
Right. That's fine. The use tax is only put in place if you failed to pay when you bought it, and it's always on your cost, never on markup. Okay? Okay, demonstrator vehicles. Demonstrator vehicles are subject to use tax. There's ways to value it. The situation is you have a vehicle in your inventory, and then you're going to use it and drive it, so you're devaluing it, so you're gonna figure out proportionally what value is being used on that vehicle. There's the Sales Tax Bulletin 86. It used to be a tax policy directive, now it's a lot easier to find. It's Sales Tax Bulletin 86. And demonstrator vehicles miles are subject to use tax. There is an exception for full-time salesmen, but they're not supposed to have any personal items in the vehicle. They're not supposed to drive it farther than 75 miles out of the area. They can't use it for personal trips. So it needs to be available for sale is the easy way to understand that. If it's available for test drives and sales, then it is exempted. But anybody else that's driving, the account manager, the president of the company, anybody that's driving a vehicle will be paying use tax on the miles. And again, Sales Tax Bulletin 86 does a good job of explaining when it's taxable and when it's not. Tire fees. 25-cent fee is imposed on each new tire sold in Indiana. It's also imposed on each new tire mounted on a vehicle at the time the vehicle is sold. So that would include the spare tire. Not-for-profits and government units are not exempted from this tax. Not everything that's exempted sales tax-wise is exempt for tire tax. It's a completely different tax that has its own rules. So this is imposed on all vehicles, on all tires sold. And so it could be sold through your parts department. It could be sold on the vehicle, including the spare. If it's used tires, no, it's got to be a new tire that's never been mounted.
Would you put it on after the time of purchase? Like say a week or two later?
Then it's going to be sold. If it was mounted, when you mounted it on that rim to put on that car, that's when the tire fee's imposed.
Okay, so even if it's not at the time of purchase, but it's like two weeks later, a month later, it's imposed?
Yep. A tire fee is only, any new tire that is put on a rim that is mounted is subject to the fee. It's not related to the transaction itself. So tire fees are exempted when tires are used on lawnmowers or garden tractors that are propelled by motors with less than 25 horsepower. New tires mounted on non-self-propelled vehicles for personal use, such as boat trailers or camping trailers, or tires purchased for resale without being mounted on a motor vehicle. So like if you want to use tires in your landscaping or something. I'm not sure what situation that would be, but if it's not going to be mounted on a vehicle. Motor vehicle rental excise tax. It applies to rentals of passenger motor vehicles for less than 30 days. So if you're renting for less than 30 days, then the motor vehicle rental excise tax applies. Not-for-profits and governmental units are not exempt, and the current rate for this tax is 4%. Counties can add supplemental auto rental excise taxes. So certain counties add an additional tax called the supplemental auto rental excise. Okay. Okay, now we're going to move on to some, yes?
On those rentals, are trailers and campers exempt from that?
It's a very good question. Can I have you take that to the technical people afterwards? I appreciate that. I have a gut response, but I want it to be accurate, so that'd be great. Okay, billing, payment, and collection. You could receive billing notices from the Department of Revenue for failure to pay, for late payments, for desk examinations, for field audits, for return check billings, or for failure to file. These are all considered bills. You may also get a notice to pay called a PFC. A PFC is if you file a return that's not yet due and you owe money, then we're going to send you a letter that says, hey, here's a coupon. Go ahead and send it by this date. That's not considered a bill. The others are all considered bills for failure to pay, late payments, desk examinations, field audits, return checks, and failure to file. And you will see notices, they start with the AR-80 stage, go to AR-40 and progress through clerks, sheriffs, and then go to our collection company. So this is what you do if you receive a bill from the Department of Revenue. You must reply by the due date on the bill. If we receive no response by the due date, the law permits the Department of Revenue to start the liability recovery efforts and the taxpayer will lose their right to protest. So when you receive a bill, don't ignore it. You can respond one of three ways. You can call the Department of Revenue, provide additional documentation to explain why you do not owe, or you can amend, same situation. Second thing you can do is you can pay the bill. You can set up a payment plan, you can pay the bill, and that's going to stop the action. Or the third thing you can do is file a protest where you provided the documentation, you don't think you owe, we don't agree, you have a right to protest. We're going to talk about each of those options. If an AR-40 demand notice for payment is received, the taxpayer needs to be aware that the due date on the bill. If you cannot pay, you must call or write the Department of Revenue by the due date and make some kind of payment arrangements. Ignoring a bill will result in it advancing through the warrant stages. Taxpayers who receive proposed assessment or denial of a claim for a refund have 60 days from the day it is issued to file a protest. This protest must be in writing, and it has to have complete information regarding the appeals process. You can find regarding the facts around why you want to protest it. You need to send this to the appeals department, and we have a protest guide on the Department of Revenue website. So you go to the Department of Revenue website, and in the search place, you just type in protest guide, and it'll give you all the steps. On the bill itself, if you look at the bottom of it, there's an address, and it tells you where you can mail your protest also. You don't have to have a lawyer to do that. You don't have to have representation. You just have to mail in facts and ask the protest division to rule on whether they agree with the bill or not. And you will have a hearing. It can be informal or formal. You have a lot of choices, but you can ask for someone else to look at the bill if you don't like the decision that we've said that it's taxable. Okay, we have some new payment plan options. Businesses owing $500 or less, we want you to pay the bill. $501 to $1,000, you can pay over a 12-month period. $1,001 to $5,000, up to 24-month period. And $5,000 or above, up to a 36-month period. We have all of this information on the website, state's website, and in the tax chapter, if you have access to the tax chapter. You can pay bills through DoorPay. You can submit corporate estimated tax payments, corporate composite withholding tax payments, and you can schedule a payment up to 90 days in advance. DoorPay offers a quick step guide on the website for easy startup. The confirmation number at the end of the transaction matches your payment locator number, so if you have any issues locating what it's being applied to, that payment locator number is important to keep. There is a fee if you use a credit card. There's a $1 portal fee and a 2% transaction total. However, if you pay using a ACH check, like your check numbers and routing numbers, there is no portal fee or transaction fee. Okay, audits. How many of you have been subjected? Whoop, I did that again. I'm so sorry. Have been under audit. Okay, yep. Several of you. Yes. Okay. So the Department of Revenue has a new tool for taxpayers. It is called the Audit Manual. It is on the state's website. Go to indiana.gov/DOR, choose Legal Resources, choose Tax Library, choose Audit Resources, and there's a thing called an Audit Manual. This will tell you everything you need to know about audit processes. No, I'm kidding. It's an overview. Everybody's industries are different, so there's no way to list every potential process that an audit might undergo. But this will give you a general idea of what to expect, what the auditor's going to do, what the verification processes are, and what your recourse is if you don't agree with the way something's being handled. We are very customer friendly at the Department of Revenue, and we truly want to communicate with you and make these as painless as possible. If you are under audit, you will be contacted by an auditor to schedule an appointment. The length of the audit can be anywhere from 3 to 10 days, but it depends on the types of records available, completeness of the records provided, and how well the records are organized. It also, I can tell you from real life, depends on how well the auditor and the taxpayer communicate. If you communicate and you resolve issues as you go, it's going to go a lot smoother. If you want to suggest tests of your system, statistical samples, and other methods when they're appropriate, then keep that communication going with your auditor and you'll get through it. After all the records are reviewed, the auditor sits down with the business owner and explains the findings. The taxpayer can choose to have a power of attorney represent them during the audit process or just at the final conference. The Indiana taxpayers always have the right to protest. If you choose to have a power of attorney represent you, you will need to fill out a form. We can't talk to anybody about your business unless you fill out a power of attorney form, and it'll specify what taxes we're allowed to talk about and what periods of time we're allowed to talk about. It's limited to what you give us permission to talk about. And the procedures and rights of protest will be provided at final conference, but they are also available on the Department of Revenue's website if you need them. So resources. The internet is a valuable resource, but not Abraham Lincoln quotes, right? The Department of Revenue website is a valuable resource. And that's where you find it. in.gov/DOR. And if you want help finding a specific topic, we have 3 people across the hall with their laptops to show you how to find the resources that you need to locate to answer your questions. If you need more detailed information, we have a sales tax bulletins, and we have a handout on our table that lists all of these bulletins, the numbers and their titles, that you can just take that card home and use it to find resources that you need. Or you can still contact us by phone. Sales and use tax questions, 233-4015, and in-tax questions, 232-2337. And there is a feedback website, and we would appreciate if you see a form that's unclear, instructions that are unclear, or you see a process that we're asking you to do that doesn't make sense, and you know it's going to help the other dealers in your area, give us form suggestions, give us website suggestions, help us give you what you need to make your tasks more clear. Stay informed, keep up on legislative updates. Every year they pass laws that change the processes and procedures and the things that we do. So we have to stay updated. And follow us on social media. We have friends on Facebook. We do a lot of fun and exciting things. So if you're into that kind of thing, follow us. And questions. We're open for questions.
I have one.
Yes.
On the convenience fee for out-of-state customers, so in Indiana, the title fee is only $15. If we're titling it in another state where the title fee is $150, are we still entitled to charge a convenience fee up to the 150% of that state's title fee?
I don't believe so. I think it's only for titling in Indiana, but that is a question that I think we should run through our policy division. So if you wouldn't mind leaving your name and number at the table, they'll get an answer from policy. My initial instinct is that's only for Indiana registration requirements. But I could be wrong on that. I'll just tell you right front. I think that's how it is, but I'm not sure. So if you want an official answer, definitely leave your name and number, okay? And probably everybody in this room is wondering the same thing, aren't you? So if maybe we need to put something on the website about that. We'll try to follow up on that. Any other questions? Yes?
Department of Revenue liens on vehicles that we're taking in on trade. Why can the Department of Revenue not give us lien releases via fax rather than making us send the titles in? I mean, chances are we're paying it. It makes it very, very difficult for us to continue doing business, you know.
Yeah, you have to clear it so you can sell it. I understand. And you have to clear it within so many days because you sold it, and I understand.
It's not very functional in your title left either. I've had it sent to my customers instead of coming back to my dealership.
We have, where I work in the customer service area and downtown, we don't release titles. We have a phone number and a division that's all they do is release the titles. And all we can do is give you their phone number. It's its own place. But that is the type of a suggestion that the Department of Revenue as a whole needs to look at, the way we communicate and how you can get that in. So make that suggestion in the form of suggestions or at the table here today. And we can follow up on that and see if that can be looked into. Currently, we provide the phone number to the division of the Department of Revenue that clears them. So I don't have any authority over that area. But it's a valid complaint, and it's not the first time we've heard that, so we need to work on that process. That's a good suggestion.
We used to receive the letters in the mail saying the lien had been released, and we used to be able to bring them here and have someone just stamp off on them. Are we still able to do that? Because I was told at one time it stopped.
I am not aware of that. I cannot speak to that. I do not have, I don't know. Can you either write it down and hand it to me, or put that issue at the table? Because they truly, the people that run the Department of Revenue truly write down all of these suggestions and look at them. And if more than one person is having the same issue, they're going to look for a fix for that. They truly want to help. So if each of you want to write down your suggestion in that area.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Snodgrass. We'll get started here. I won't keep you real long. I believe I'm the last speaker of the day. So we'll get you on your way here. Again, my name is Mark Snodgrass. I'm here on behalf of the Indiana Attorney General's office. I've worked for the office for about 10 years. I've handled several hundred auto dealership cases. So I've quite a bit of experience in this area. I'd like to take a little time to briefly tell you what the Attorney General's office does with regards to auto dealers. Unlike Secretary of State's office or the Department of Revenue, you're not going to interact with us every day. Ideally, you'll never interact with us. The AG's office really only gets involved when things go wrong. If everyone's happy, you're likely never going to hear from us, but unfortunately, that's just not the reality of the industry. Our office is divided. The Consumer Protection Division is divided into two groups. We have consumer mediation and consumer litigation. We handle a significant number of consumer complaints from auto dealerships. I believe it's the second highest number of complaints that are filed within the state. I think the first being robocalls. By law, we have to mediate consumer complaints when we receive them. So what happens if a consumer has an issue with your auto dealership, they buy a car, it doesn't work right, they don't get a title, any one of a number of problems, they file a complaint with our office, we have a duty to mediate it. It goes to consumer mediation, and most likely it'll go to our auto analyst, whose name's Michael Buckman. He's sitting in the back there. Give a wave, Michael. What Michael does is, first and foremost, he'll send the consumer's complaint to the dealership. The dealership then has an opportunity to respond, tell us their side of the story, what happened, make any offers to make it right, and then Michael will follow up as needed, and pass that information on to the consumer, and basically just try and resolve the issue if we can informally. In most cases, if there is no way to resolve the issue, that's the end of it with our office. If it's just the consumer bought a car, it doesn't work very well, it's an as-is state, we close it and that's the end of it. For some cases, though, we do notice violations of Indiana law, and then Michael refers them to me or another attorney, and those then go into consumer litigation, where we then investigate the matters and at times file lawsuits to enforce Indiana law against the violating dealerships. We bring a variety of dealerships. These are the most common. I'm not going to spend time on these because they're pretty self-explanatory, and most dealerships don't have issues with them. We bring lawsuits when dealers don't deliver titles, don't pay off trade-ins. Those type of complaints usually happen en masse after a dealership goes under, has financial problems. We step in, try and help clean up the mess, try and get consumers what they're owed, trade-in payoffs, their titles, try and make the consumers whole from the transactions. We've done a lot of cases regarding excessive document fees, which we're going to get into that a little bit deeper here just because there is a new statute. We'll get into that in a moment. We do odometer misrepresentations, failure to disclose salvage title brands, deceptive advertising, and unlicensed dealer sales. We enforce the Deceptive Consumer Sales Act, which regulates deceptive advertising. And that covers dealers, covers basically all merchants in Indiana. It's a pretty broad statute, and essentially at its very core it boils down to you can't make false statements during a transaction. There's a lot more to it than that, but at its core, don't make false statements during the transactions and you'll probably be okay. I'd like to get into a few topics in a little bit greater detail, specifically stuff that we've either taken enforcement action on lately or that we have noticed is becoming a problem. The first is document preparation fees. Now, previously, there was a doc fee statute that did not have a cap on the amount you could charge. Most dealers charged $200, but the statute actually said you could only charge a document fee that covered costs that you actually incurred in preparing your documents. It was very subjective. For us to enforce it, we really had to get into a dealership's bookkeeping and financials, and it was quite burdensome. That all changed on May 5th, 2019. I'm sure, hopefully, you're all aware that the doc fee statute changed. The new statute now has a cap. Your document preparation fee cannot exceed $200. And that is the number for this year. That number could change in the future. Under the statute, the doc fee is linked to the consumer price index. So if that consumer price index goes up, the max cap for the doc fee could go up as well. A few things that we have seen: don't represent to consumers in your doc fee, during the sales process that you have to charge $200. Dealers don't have to charge $200. That's simply the cap. A dealer can charge anywhere from $0 to $200. Don't represent it's a fee mandated by the state. You'd be surprised how many dealers we find telling people that it's a fee they have to charge consumers under state law. Do you have a question?
Yes, the doc fee, we use finance companies that they charge a doc fee. Is that a separate thing that is not regulated because they're not in Indiana?
Yeah, if it's, the document preparation fee definition does not include finance charges. So if your lenders are charging some sort of financial amount that's for the documents, that's something completely different. And this is purely for dealers, not the cost of financing. Enforcement of this will get much easier now that's $200. If the AG's office or the Secretary of State's office sees a doc fee being charged that's over $200, it's pretty easy for us to investigate and enforce that. I would like to highlight one other portion of the doc fee statute. This is somewhat new. In the prior statute, one of the components of a proper doc fee was that it had to be negotiable. That's all the statute provided, just that it has to be negotiable. That was kind of opaque. No one was exactly sure what that meant. So the new doc fee statute changes that and lists 3 specific areas where you have to disclose your doc fee. The first time, it must be disclosed in the advertised sale price of a vehicle. For example, if you're advertising a car for $10,000 online, you have a $200 doc fee, the sale price that's advertised should be $10,200. Now in the past, most dealerships would have a disclaimer at the bottom, something along the lines of tax, title, doc fee, extra. That's not going to fly anymore under the new statute. In fact, that would be a red flag that that amount is not included in the advertised price, and pretty much be low-hanging fruit for enforcement actions. The second time dealer has to disclose the doc fee is during negotiations. I would assume this is likely going on at your dealerships already. Anytime you give someone a term sheet with the numbers being negotiated, just list that doc fee on there and you'll be in compliance. The final time is as a line item on the bill of sale. This I'm sure everyone is doing already and has been doing for some time. The next category of things I like to talk about, we've taken a special interest in prize mailings lately. I shouldn't say lately, about the past year. I'm sure many of your dealerships, if you have not used these, you've received sales pitches on using these often. Prize mailings are sent by third-party promoters who are usually out-of-state companies. They come in and say, hey, we'll design these mailings. They'll drive a lot of foot traffic to your dealership. We'll set up a tent or have some sort of event at the dealership where they come in, bring their prize mailings in, see if they want a prize, and we'll move a significant amount of inventory for you. We are looking at these specifically because Indiana was just being overrun with these. We're getting millions and millions of these in the state. So we're trying to make an effort to clean up the industry, and so far it looks like it's working a bit. We're seeing a lot of prize mailings, a lot of people complaining about prize mailings that had a lot of misrepresentations on them. They weren't complying with Indiana law, and we'll get into those. I got some examples I'll show you in a few minutes here. But we have taken a special interest in those and have been bringing enforcement actions against both promoters and dealerships in the past year. What typically happens in the cases where we enforce is that The promoter points at the dealership and says, they're the Indiana dealership, they should know Indiana law, they reviewed it, it's on them. The dealership then turns around and tells us, no, the promoter represented they were in compliance with the law, it's on them, so we have both sides pointing at each other. I guess our position is we don't particularly care and we hold both parties accountable. If you're engaging in advertising, you have to make sure your advertising is in compliance with the law. So my advice on prize mailings as a whole would be to protect yourself, specifically talk to an attorney. It doesn't hurt to run these by an attorney before they're sent out. Prize mailing companies, in my experience, have no idea what's in Indiana law. Even if they're complying with another state's law, they're not checking Indiana. So it'd be best to contact your Indiana attorney to talk about those before you send them. A couple of red flags when I come across prize mailings, things that really jump out at me if there's going to be a problem with these. A meaningless game piece representing that a recipient won a prize. Representations that a recipient won a specific prize. There's a statute in Indiana called the Indiana Promotional Gifts and Contests Act, which regulates prize mailings such as these. It has quite a few requirements. The main ones that are clear on its face that they're being violated, you have to state the odds in the same size and font next to each prize listing. You have to state the retail value in the same size font next to each prize listing. And you also have to make a disclaimer if the recipient is going to be invited to hear a sales presentation that is the case. And in all these prize mailings, the point is to get people into the dealership to attempt to sell them the car. They're not going to bring their prize mailing in and walk away without anyone talking to them about a new vehicle purchase. So that disclosure should be listed. I have a couple examples of some prize mailings that we have taken action against. You'll see on this one here, this is not atypical, and I've seen this design numerous times. What happens is, I'm going to step away from the podium. Not sure if everyone can hear me. This is a scratch-off piece right here. The consumer gets the mailing, scratches off the number, sees 262155, and then you pull your pull tab on this side to see what prize you won. And in this case, of course, there's the same number, matches there. That prize was $1,000 cash. So in this one, a couple hundred people took this mailing to the dealership thinking, hey, I won $1,000 cash. It says it right there. They get to the dealership and they're awarded a $5 Walmart gift card. They complain to us. We look at the mailing. Then there's problems. In addition to the misrepresentation of that the consumer won a specific prize there, the fact that the game piece is representing that, hey, if you match these numbers, this is how you win. That's not how the consumers actually win the prizes. Consumers win the prizes by matching it says your official PIN at the top. That's all that matters on this. The game piece is completely irrelevant, which is deceptive to the consumers. Doesn't matter at all. The dealership simply looks at the PIN, matches on their board, and sees if one of 40,000 people won that prize. Additionally, you'll see the prizes listed, such as Apple Sport Watch, don't have the odds. It should say I think this one was 1 in 40,000. It should say 1 in 40,000 in that size font. It doesn't. Same thing with retail value. It doesn't. It's pretty big giveaways when I'm glancing at these. Most of these will have a phone number. It's called Lucky Winners Call Immediately with a phone number. These are answered either by the dealership or oftentimes by an answering service provided by the promoter. The scripts usually entail getting information about the consumer's current vehicle, informing them that, yes, indeed, you did win. Just come to the dealership and pick up your prize. So the consumers, that's reinforced that, hey, I won a pretty big prize. And then they get there, they win a $5 Walmart gift card that they didn't even know was an option. So it makes people pretty angry. You don't want angry people leaving your dealership and reporting this stuff to us. Here's another example. You see this one quite a bit too. You scratch off the numbers. In this case, you got 40172 and $1,000 cash, 40172. I think a reasonable person just in a vacuum would say, hey, I won $1,000. Now, most people are not going to take the time to take this to the dealership because they think it's junk mail. But it is a misrepresentation. It says you won $1,000, you didn't. You get there, $5 Walmart gift card, comes to us. Same thing here. You got your scratch off up there. This one says you win $2,000 cash. And all of these, the front or the back, I think the other one's on the back, have fine print that is almost unreadable to any person with normal eyesight. You can't put in fine print the actual details of the contest. I see a lot of dealers or the promoters put in there, the game piece doesn't actually mean anything. You actually have to match this random code up to something at the dealership, and they try and use that as their out to say, hey, no, we disclosed everything. You can't make a false statement and then try and put somewhere in minute fine print that, yeah, actually that statement wasn't correct. So this one, on the other hand, is a recent one after our enforcement efforts. This is one that recently went out, and I know one of the attorneys that vetted this had worked with our office in the past on getting these in compliance. This one's not perfect, but we're getting there. As you can see, we have the prize listings here, $5,000 cash, and we have the odds, 1 in 500,000. In addition to just being a technical requirement, that's important because if a consumer sees I won $1,000 and they see the odds are, that's one in half a million, they're probably more likely to chalk it up as a scam or a junk mail and toss it as opposed to thinking, hey, this is legit. So that's good, we have that. We don't have the game piece. It just simply states bring your mailer and match the number to the number posted. That's perfectly fine. Overall, this one, it's not perfect. There's a few small things with it, but it's not going to get our attention. It's not something that we're going to rush to the courthouse to file enforcement action on. We'll probably let the small technical violations slide as long as it's not in-your-face deceptive. So it can be done, but hopefully we'll see more of these if dealerships do these in the future. Our current enforcement procedure on these mailings, our biggest goal to kind of shape up this industry is to get rid of the promoters who are doing this deceptively. So to that end, every time we identify a promoter, we've been filing a lawsuit against them immediately. I think we've filed 7 lawsuits in the past year against promoters. We've gotten some pretty significant settlements out of about half of those. The other half, immediately after we filed, literally vacated their premises and disappeared. So that kind of tells you what kind of industry you're dealing with on the other side when, you know, we come calling and they literally just leave their premises. The settlements we've been offering to dealers who have these offending prize mailings, we've been offering them 50 cents per mailing to settle it, memorialized through a settlement mechanism called an assurance of voluntary compliance. And then in the event we couldn't come to an agreement on a settlement, we would file a lawsuit against the dealer. But that's how we've been currently doing this. Now, we are rolling out a self-reporting program where dealers self-report their old mailings to us if they think there's a problem with them. This applies to mailings that were sent the prior 2 years. That's our statute of limitations. Anything beyond 2 years is unactionable by us. Our ultimate goal is to identify more promoters so we can go after them, drive them into compliance. But we also think it's important to hold dealers responsible as well, because if the dealers aren't ensuring that their advertising is correct, the promoter's not going to do it. No one has an incentive to ensure that's correct. But to that end, our new self-reporting program, if you bring the mailings to us and say, here's what happened, identify the promoter, we give you a deal on the civil penalty. It would be 25 cents per mailing. There would be an agreement to assist the AG in prosecuting the promoters. Like I said, usually when we're enforcing these, between the dealer and the promoter, it's like that Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other. Like that's what we get. Everyone says the other guy's at fault, so we use the dealers to help us go against them. We'd agreed to no press release, not to publicize this. Often in our lawsuits, the lawsuit itself and the media attention it gets is much more harmful to a dealership than the actual civil penalties that end up being assessed. There'd be no admission of liability or wrongdoing, and the settlement would also be memorialized in the AVC. This self-reporting program is going on until December 31st, 2019. Starting January 1st, 2020, we're going to take a little harsher line with these. Starting then, unreported prize mailings that were sent in the prior 2 years will be handled by filing complaints against both the dealer and the promoter. And the minimum settlement goes up to $1 per mailing as opposed to the lesser amount of 25 cents. And the big issue here is also that our communications department would have free rein to issue a press release if they felt it necessary. Obviously, most dealers do not want a story about misleading or deceptive mailing showing up in their local newspaper. That obviously burns a lot of goodwill. But if you have Any prize mailings you'd like to report, feel free to get in contact with my office and we can walk you through that process. The next thing I'd like to touch on is Craigslist sales. This should be pretty self-explanatory and simple, but lately we've had to take multiple enforcement actions and this seems to be spreading a lot. Specifically dealers posting as individuals on Craigslist. Nothing wrong with selling your vehicles on Craigslist, advertising your inventory, but Craigslist is divided into two parts. We have, you can advertise as for sale by owner, which dealers are explicitly prohibited from entering that category, and we have for sale by dealer. We've lately gone after a couple of the biggest offenders that were posting thousands of vehicles in their inventory over the years to under for sale by owner. Hopefully we can get those out of there and into the dealer section where they belong. The bright line rule is don't post Craigslist ads under for sale by owner if you're a dealer. This is typically what we've been seeing. And these are not just posting in the wrong spot. These are designed to make it look like the dealership is not selling them. They're trying to make it look like an individual is selling them to suck these people in who don't want to deal with the dealership, pay dealership fees, don't want to deal with salespeople. That's apparently a significant portion of the car buying population. But they, see at the bottom we have a bunch of things. There's no mention of dealership anywhere, which is kind of odd for advertising. We ask you to call a specific person, in this case David, at the number. That's going to be the cell phone, the salesman's cell phone number. They call the salesman up. The salesman doesn't mention that he's from a dealership. They say, oh, come test drive the car at this address. They show up at the dealership, and by that time either they like the car or they're kind of in the salesman's hooks, and they go on with the transaction. We've gotten a couple complaints about these recently. Like I said, we've taken some enforcement action. So pretty simple. If you're a dealer, don't post them for sale by owner, and there won't be any problems with that. The last item I'd like to touch on is bump stickers. And we entered 2 settlements recently over bump stickers. If you're not familiar, a bump sticker is a sticker posted by the dealership next to the Monroney label on the window of the vehicle. It's not a manufacturer sticker, it's a dealership sticker. What it does is basically it bumps the price of the vehicle. It adds some extra items here. In this case, we've got mud guards, all other floor mats, cargo trunk tray, spare tire kit, and they raise the price by, it's kind of hard to see, it's $39.90, and then they add that to the MSRP for a total of $28,210. Now, there's nothing inherently illegal about bump stickers, but there are some guidelines you should probably be aware of to make sure you're not engaging in deceptive advertising. These have been a problem. I haven't seen them in Marion County recently. Our enforcement actions have been down south along the Kentucky border. I think they're much more prevalent in Kentucky, and dealership groups in Kentucky that bleed up into Clarksville and southern Indiana have been using them. But here's a couple rules if you are going to use a bump sticker. If you're going to include a bump sticker, include the cost of the bump sticker on your advertising. So if you have a car that's $10,000 and you have a bump sticker that's $1,000, don't advertise the car as $10,000, and when the consumer comes in, tell them, well, it's actually $11,000. Like, that's deceptive advertising. You're advertising a fake price or incorrect price. That's technically a bait and switch tactic that will get you in trouble. So if you want to use a bump sticker, be upfront about it. Advertise the price of the car as what's advertised on the bump sticker if you're going to mandate the consumer pay that amount for the vehicle. Now, if you're going to tell the consumer that's purely optional, these are optional extras, the same way an extended warranty or gap insurance or any other additional add-on product, that's fine. You don't have to advertise it, but if your salesmen are telling consumers, yes, that's where negotiations start, that's how much the car costs, is the final price of the bump sticker, got to disclose in advertising. The second major rule is do not list any items on the bump sticker that are provided by the manufacturer as part of the MSRP. That includes manufacturer warranties, towing services, roadside assistance, etc. For example, this is one we recently entered into a settlement. They're including this bump sticker on their windows. And as you can see, the main items, the mud guard, spare tire kit, and pinstripe, probably added up to maybe a little over $100 cost to the dealer. They're charging $399. So obviously, I think many consumers would have saw that and said, whoa, I'm not paying that. That's ridiculous. To make it a little more feasible for consumers, they added basically all manufacturer's warranties. They added the 10-year, 10,000-mile limited powertrain warranty, basic warranty, even the 5-year, 60,000-mile 24-hour roadside assistance. That makes it look like to get these items, you have to pay this price, which is incorrect. You're getting those items with the purchase of the vehicle, paying the MSRP. You don't have to pay the extra $39.90. We do that separately from cash against this, and a couple similar ones that are doing something very similar. I believe that's everything I wanted to highlight. We got through that pretty quick, which is fine. Get everyone out of here a little early. It's probably been a long day, so I thank you for your attention. If you have future questions about this stuff, the first place you should go is your attorney. Your attorney is going to know Indiana law, can figure it out. Also, your dealership groups, ADAI, Independent Auto Dealers Association. We talk to those groups quite often. They know what we're doing. They know what we're looking for. Your attorneys also may have contacts there. They may be able to help you keep up to date on what you should and should not do. We're not trying to we're not trying to get anyone to fall into any holes. A lot of the stuff is not spelled out explicitly in statutes. Like I said, the Deceptive Consumer Sales Act is pretty broad and wide-ranging, but is pretty clear about making false statements, which can be applied across a variety of dealership advertising. So, does anyone have any questions? No, that's completely up to you. A consumer complaint, if a consumer complaint is sent to the dealership, anyone at the dealership can respond. If you want to send it through your attorney, some dealerships do. That's completely your prerogative, but no, you do not need an attorney to respond to the Attorney General's office.
Okay, and then another question, is there any way that we can find out a resolution? If we get one, we respond to it. I know that you've contacted the consumer and given them a resolution, but you never contact us to give us a resolution. Is there a way we can find out if it's resolved or?
The best way to do it is follow up with who sent you the letter. Usually that's Michael. But typically what happens in cases where they just kind of fall by the wayside, the dealership says, hey, we'll offer you, we'll do X, Y, and Z to fix this. They pass that offer on to the consumer and say, if the consumer is not responding to them, or they'll say, hey, this is the best offer we're going to get you in this matter. You may want to take it. If not, talk to your private attorney. We send out that letter, close the file, and we often don't get a final resolution from that consumer. So if you have a question of whether we're still looking at something, feel free to contact whoever sent you the letter. They'll be able to tell you one way or another. Usually the answer is going to be, we haven't heard back from the consumer, we closed our file.
What was the mindset behind the no tax title license, the $200? Because if you're on the border of a state and you're listing your cars at an internet price and you're competing, relatively close to somebody else, they might not go to your dealership for $200 extra. So you either have to not charge document title fee now, or you're going to outprice yourself.
Yeah, obviously that was the legislature that set that. But I could say, I think the rationale is that other things like taxes, titles, those aren't fees that are going to the dealership. Those are fees that the dealership's simply collecting and remitting. So the doc fee is essentially a profit center is not the right word, but it's covering overhead expenses for the dealership. So that's, I think that's the rationale, is that if it's going to the dealership, going into the dealership's pocket, it should be advertised in the sale price of the vehicle along with the other expenses the dealership may be incurring. But so that's why it's distinct from taxes and titles, so that it's not being retained by the dealership. I get what you're saying about dealerships on border states. But yeah, especially like Kentucky, I know has very little, I don't think they have any doc fee statute. Doc fees in Kentucky are significantly higher than here. Last I saw, they're $400 some on average in Kentucky. It's not as bad as with Illinois, but yeah, I understand what you're saying.
What about if you have a dealership in your competitive market that dropped their dock fee and now they've come up with a cleaning fee? What's that fall under?
A dealership can charge a fee for pretty much whatever it wants. I'm sure there's some law somewhere that says you can't charge something, but cleaning fees, if you dealership wanted to charge a salesman compensation fee, there's nothing that says they can't do that. Obviously, I think what's stopping that is the consumer's often going to balk at paying a cleaning fee or a salesman fee. But if you want to charge a fee explicitly for document preparation, then you got to disclose it in that way. If you want to charge a fee for something else, and it actually covers something else, you're more than welcome to break that out as a line item or however you want to do it. But
Probably have to be included in lending though, if you did that. A lot of those fees might not be added into the finance chart in that treatment.
yeah, you'd have, obviously you have to comply with TILA requirements, but just from a purely a, can I charge a fee for whatever, there's nothing explicit that says you can. You'd obviously have to include it in the finance charges and whatnot, but I think the reason why people don't is because consumers are not gonna pay it. They're gonna push back on that more than they would a dock fee. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.